Listen to Tank Chat, Tank Museum. Richard Smith, top 5 tanks. So, I'm in the parking lot. I'm eating some bread. If need be, I can go buy a banana. They're about 20 to 25 cents a piece. I got about 60 cents, so I should be able to buy 2 more bananas. And I have a little bit of change left over. It rained all day today. From the little bit that I was out there, I ended up pretty well soaked. Not dead though. I'm not dead. I can wish all I want. That still ain't happening. Alright. And just in case potential future issues, let's make sure we don't run out of battery on either of my telephones. I do have some bread left. I'm also certain that if I try to dig around, I can find some crackers in here. I have some food that was a few days old, but on that day, people gave me so much fucking food, there is no way that I was gonna be able to eat it all. Definitely glad to have it. But it doesn't stop predators. I'm listening to Tank Chats here for a bit. If you don't want to listen to it, that's fine. I'm not going to make you.
As our core objects in our collection. And for a machine, if it's just static inside a display hall, I always describe it as this is like a stuffed lion in a natural history museum. How much of a lion can the kids understand if it's just there static inside a case? It's in running a vehicle that the vehicle comes to life and engages people on a completely different level, where you can smell the petrol, you can hear the sound, you can feel the ground shake as it moves, and it's that makes Tiger 131 such a special vehicle. And it's because of that, we know it makes a difference. If you look at things like YouTube, the other 5 Tigers have 200,000 or 300,000 viewings on YouTube between them. This gets a couple of million a year. And while using YouTube as a metric of cultural value is filled with risk, if that was the only thing that mattered in terms of view count, you'd have a lot more videos on the Tank Museum YouTube channel. Cats look a bit like Hitler, but it gives a flavour of what people care about, what people want to engage with. And it's by doing this, by working with the vehicle, managing that balance of cultural value compared to degradation, that Tiger 131 in our field in museums has become one of the most important case studies in the world of the cultural value and the process of making decisions about large working objects and how we use them. And because of that, because it's the most famous tank in the world, Tiger 131 is number 5 on my top 5 list. Now, number 4 on my top 5 list of tanks today is a Sherman tank called Michael. Now, there are 50,000-ish Sherman tanks made altogether. Of the 50,000, in my view, this one here is the most important of all of them. Now, if you want to find out about the tank itself, watch David Fletcher's video. He does it better than me, and he tells you everything you need to know about the vehicle. But what I'm thinking about today is the significance of this particular vehicle, and it's the meaning, how it fits into the world, what we learn about the world from this tank that we don't learn from other Shermans. And for me, there are two things that are really important about this one. The first one is, this is the oldest Sherman left in the world. It's Sherman number 2. No one really knows what happened to Sherman number 1. It disappeared somewhat into the ether in a puff of smoke. Sherman number 2, oldest tank in the world, in museums, in heritage. These superlatives are oldest, fastest, first, biggest, worst, best, all that kind of stuff. Superlatives matter. People give significance to the most extreme one. The oldest counts. But I think actually the second reason that this tank is important is the most significant reason, and that's related to the name Michael. Now, normally to get your name on the side of a tank, you have to be a soldier, because they're the people who use them. But this chap, Michael, was a diplomat. He was a bloke called Michael Dewar, and he was head of the British tank mission to Washington in the Second World War, and it's his job to negotiate the deals with the Americans about getting new modern tanks for the British Army to use against the Germans. And when Michael Dewar goes to America in the summer 1940, the tanks the British are using, or producing at least, are things like Covenant, which is kind of starting to get into its peak of production around there. And Covenant, you get some apologists for Covenant, but it's really a genuine shock of a tank. You don't make over 1,000 of something you're only ever going to plan to use for training. And it's the background which Michael Dewar has negotiation for equipment like this. And because of Michael Dewar's work, his success of the negotiation, the American desire to help the British, this was the first Sherman that the British get from the Americans in the Second World War. It's the first of something like 15,000, roughly, that the British Army used in the Second World War. But this one in particular is paraded around the UK as a symbol of the Americans are on our side. And when we think about the meaning of an object, let's just dwell on this for a moment and think what that means. That this was a British at the lowest ebb. Things have gone a bit upside down on the continent, and things haven't gone as planned. And to be able to say the Americans are on our side makes a real difference. And yes, the Americans speak funny and they don't play cricket, but you'd rather have them on your side than not. And the endurance of what's arguably the world's most significant, most important, most successful military alliance, the English-speaking nations of the Second World War and beyond, is embodied in this particular vehicle. If you want an explanation about why did British soldiers serve in Afghanistan, well, it's because America was attacked and Britain was on the same side, and this is why Britain was on the same side. So as a symbol of that extraordinary alliance, Michael, the Sherman, is number 4 on my top 5 list. Number 3 on my top 5 list today is TOG 2. Well, I can't put in Tiger into this top 5 and not include TOG, really, can I? And is TOG 2 the best tank ever? You could probably debate that. But what we're looking at today is significance when we're looking at why this tank is particularly important. So I'm not thinking here about the type of tank that TOG is. I'm thinking about why this tank matters as an individual piece. In particular for me with TOG 2, what I want to think about is how it's significant, how its meaning has changed in the last 10 years or so. That's because TOG 2 is a tank that has always had significance as a piece. So this is a piece where It's a Second World War prototype. It's an attempt to put a great big gun on a British tank. It's a worthy but failed prototype. But it's a prototype that's made and designed by the original tank team. TOG stands for the old gang. These are the real tank experts from the First World War who come back and have another go. And it's always had that significance to it. But that was significance actually for a very small number of people. And when we rearranged the Tank Museum about 15 years ago, TOG was kind of an 80 tons side story that took up huge amounts of space and was difficult to move. And it moved into this corner in some ways because of its lack of significance. And it's the only place we could put it, and we had to put soap down on the floor and all sorts of things to get it into this position. But then things changed, and what changed was not the vehicle itself, but how people related to it. What changed in particular was wargaming. World of Tanks came along. And we've had a long-running partnership here with World of Tanks. And I often get asked about how we as a Tank Museum found ourselves partnering with a video game company, and what that means and what difference it makes to us. And for me, TOG 2 is the best example of good things that can come from different sorts of partnerships. When I first came, I met Victor Kisley when he came here in 2011. We went around the Tank Museum, we had a cup of tea, and we realised we shared similar views on many things in the world, particularly about the study of military history. Studying military history is something which, the more people understand the military history, the more the understanding there is in the world about warfare, the less attractive warfare becomes. That when people know what war means, it's very difficult to engage in it casually. And we realised that here at the Tank Museum we had the real thing. We got the actual stuff. And Victor with World of Tanks had a huge and growing audience, and we realised we were able to put these things together. We could potentially do something quite special. And TOG shows how that works, because when TOG 2 came into the World of Tanks game, the interest in this vehicle skyrocketed. And by people like the Mighty Jingles and the other influencers highlighting this vehicle, it gained a level of interest that it simply didn't have before. And it's a wonderful example of how an object which always had intrinsic value can be brought to life for hundreds of thousands or millions of people by the way in which we engage with it, and by being a tank for which the engagement, taking it to new sorts of people who would never have heard of this before. This tank, TOG 2, earns its place on my top 5 list at number 3. The Tank Museum is a registered charity, and every purchase you make from our online shop directly supports our work. We ship worldwide, and if you subscribe to our email list, we'll give you 10% off your next order. When you finish this video, go to tankmuseumshop.org and you'll find something you never knew you needed. Now, the next tank on my top 5 list of tanks today is a Mark I British First World War tank. Now, I know what you're thinking. Now, people who saw my first top 5 tanks would say, hang on a second, you did a Mark I in your first one too. This is cheating. Well, it's not completely cheating, because that was a completely different Mark I tank to the one I'm going to talk about next. This one is different, this one's special, and we've actually got, if you think about it, depending on your interpretation of the tank, 3 Mark I tanks here at the Tank Museum. Now, it's fair to say that this particular Mark I is suffering from a certain amount of degradation. But here we have Mark I tank number D6. Now, yes, it's showing some signs of wear and tear. It's seen better days. But in the words of the great philosopher, it's really only a flesh wound. And I don't think we should be letting a few car park dings take away from the fact that
Yeah, let's see what this thing looks like.
one of the most important tanks in the world, because D6 is special. D6 was one of the first tanks ever to go into battle.
There's four
And we
parts
know
to it.
this because of the work of a great historian, a guy called Trevor Pigeon, one of the best historians I've ever met. And Trevor described these bits as the holy relics of armoured warfare. And this was a guy who was qualified to have an opinion. Because when I say he's one of the best historians I've met, it's because historians are on a quest for truth and they want to find out what actually happened. History isn't guesswork. And Trevor Pigeon did the pick and shovel work of research. He did the grinding, boring research, the really detailed stuff about the Battle of Fleur, the first time that tanks were used. And Trevor went tank by tank, blow by blow, through the Battle of Fleur to find out exactly what happened. So for each tank, he was using aerial photographs to tell not just where the commander of the tank thought it had gone, but where it had actually gone. And he did that for each vehicle. And it was during a tour of the battlefield that he was taking that he found these pieces on the battlefield. And Trevor was probably the only person in the world who could not only identify them as parts of a Mark I tank, but parts of a specific Mark I tank. He knew which one it was and what had happened to it. And Trevor was able to identify this as D6. Now, D6 was commanded by a young man called Reginald Legg. And Reginald Legg was one of the very first tank soldiers ever. He joined up very early on into the Study Branch Machine Gun Corps. He had a reputation as a bit of a martinet. And when the attack's launched in Fleur, Legg's tank is one of the ones that gets over the start line. There's about a dozen or something of them get over the start line. He gets over the start line and actually really starts mixing it with the German position. He takes on an artillery battery. A colonel of a nearby infantry regiment said he did work of material value, that he really made a difference. And bear in mind, as the first day of armoured warfare, what happens on that day is proving the concept of a tank. This is the day that if it's just a messy disaster and nothing gets achieved, the tanks may not have continued to exist. They may have just dropped away. But Legg's contribution specifically makes a real difference. There isn't a happy ending for Legg himself. His tank gets knocked out. He and his crew escape. He gets hit. And he dies. We're not sure exactly when he dies. He either dies on that day, on the 15th September, or the day after. He's captured by the Germans. But Legg dies. And one of his colleagues, another young tank commander, a guy called Arthur Blowers, reflects back on the event later, and he says, "Dear old fire-eating Legg, he came so near to being great." But what we've got here at the Tank Museum, yeah, these are the first things we show our visitors as they come into the museum. These are the origins of armoured warfare, physically here. They connect us to this monumental, essential, this pivotal event in the story of armoured warfare. They connect us to a young man in battle, leading his crew into the fight, closing with the enemy at the most dangerous place in the world. He's right at the front of the Battle of the Somme. But it also says something for us about Reginald Legg as well, that by putting these here, and over the course of the time this particular display has been open here at the Tank Story exhibition at the Tank Museum, there's probably been best part of a couple of million people have walked past this exhibit and have had a chance to learn about Reginald Legg's story. And perhaps what we've been able to do here is help Reginald Legg become more than just near to being great. And that's why this is number 2 on my top 5 list of tanks. Now, number one on today's top 5 list is a First World War British tank, which probably shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who saw my first top 5 I did before, because I really like First World War British tanks. But this is a completely different First World War British tank to any of the ones that were in my top 5 initially, and therefore this is absolutely fine. And this is the Tank Museum's Mark V tank. Now, Mark V tank is an unusual thing anyway. There's only 5 of them around. This is the only one in Western Europe. So as an object in itself, it has significance, so rare is important. It's also probably the best documented Mark V in the world. So we know this particular tank went into action on the 8th of August at the Battle of Amiens in 1918 and was commanded by a young man called Harold Wittenbury, who won a military cross in this tank, using it as a battering ram to demolish a German position, which didn't really take due care of the integrity of the artifact, but he had a job to do, so we'll let him off. So it's an important artifact. It's an artifact with a distinctive story. And those both had significance, and significance is really the magic word for today's top 5. It's what makes this vehicle important. But the significance of this vehicle for me goes beyond that. And that's because this particular vehicle, this Mark V, this was the last working British First World War tank in the world. This was the last one. It was operated here for decades to help bring the First World War to life. But when I arrived here at the Tank Museum in 2006, we had to make a decision about whether we were going to run it for Tank Fest. And actually, we decided that year in 2006 that we were going to stop running it. And we were going to stop running it because of cracks in the frame of the vehicle, which threatened its integrity. There are a number of cracks down here, which effectively really threatened the vehicle structure. So what happens on a First World War tank? There isn't any suspension on these vehicles. So because there is no suspension, when this goes over an obstacle, what you get is the whole weight of the vehicle goes across the struts up and down and across the vehicle, and the metal plates that hold it. So as long as those cracks are in compression, they're probably okay. But if they go into tension, if they open out, then the vehicle can tear apart. But it's beyond the fact that I'm part of this tank story. So I made the decision of we're not going to run this anymore. But the way I made that decision also matters to me. And that's because it wasn't a decision I could take lightly, and it wasn't a decision I felt I could take on my own. So I called in the cavalry. And in particular, I called in my dad. Now, this isn't quite as random a move as it might seem, because my dad's he's a bit of a metal basher. He's a metallurgist by trade, and specifically, actually, he used to run the Oxford University materials department, so he's quite good on things like metal fatigue and steel. So I went round this vehicle with my dad and also another colleague of his who was running the Oxford University corrosion unit. And we went round this, and the scientists were kind of going, scratching chins and poking it. And it was they're the ones who picked out the cracking and the risk to the vehicle. And it was a team effort to make that call. And this was a big call to take a vehicle that was running and make it a non-runner. But for me, that was the first time I'd worked professionally with my dad. And that really mattered to me. So I'm part of its story. And this was something I did with my dad, so it was part of my story. But the other thing that happened to this vehicle, the story doesn't completely stop there either, because we ran this vehicle one more time to reposition it, after that event. So we moved it on the back end of a low loader, we moved it off again. And it was possibly the only time I properly abused my position as director of the Tank Museum, because as a lifelong fan of First World War British tanks, I took a caddy in the back of the tank. And it was the most uncomfortable, noisy, smelliest, and unforgettable journey I've ever had in my life. When this thing goes over a bump, the impact goes from your toes through to your ears, and it's extraordinary, and it's an experience I'll remember for the rest of my life. And it makes us think about what an object is, because this is an object, an artifact, with significance in its own right. We all share the same significance of the vehicle and the events that are associated with it. But when you think about a museum, when you think about the experience of visiting, it's not just the physical matter of the artifact and the events around it. It's how you relate to it as an individual. It's what it means, in this case, to me. So the fact that I interacted with it, I became part of the vehicle story when I made that call to stop running it. And for me, that experience of working with my dad and the extraordinary experience of having a ride in a First World War tank, those are things that will stay with me for the rest of my life. And because of that, this Mark V is number one on my list of top 5 tanks today. I hope you enjoyed my next top 5 tanks. I know some people are going to be disappointed there are only 2 First World War British tanks in there, but no, Tom could count as a First World War British tank depending on your point of view. So, and we've got more as well. So if I do another one, then there's more First World War British tanks we can pick from. So just to make you feel better. If you did enjoy this video, please continue to support the Tank Museum. We do need your help. Subscribing to us on YouTube, supporting us on Patreon, making a purchase from our online shop. These are all ways you can help us do the work we do and continue to bring this subject alive for the future.
I'm actually born and raised in Toronto, Canada, but my heritage is Ukrainian.
Ah, right. I've heard of Ukraine, but what's this other place? The Toronto Can. No, I like it. Okay, I just made that up.
Я бачу твоє дуже гарне волосся. Я кажу, ти дуже красива. Але вважаю, я тебе можу вбивати. You know what I mean?
I don't care what... I don't even know if I want to know what it means, because it means a whole lot to me.
I'm actually born and raised in Toronto, Canada, but my heritage... POV dating during the sassy mandemic of 2023.
Why can't you start any conversation? Like, do you even want me? Like, what do you...
Let's review the comments. Them now unfollowing too, like that's for the girls to do. I woke up this morning and was blocked. Like, he said this emoji during an argument. I texted him, what you doing? And he said, wouldn't you like to know? Nah, when he uses the eye roll emoji. Agwek says, when a man actually wants a mutual relationship. I'm pretty sure this is just a dude being facetious to see if the girlies would agree with him, and they did. So what I'm getting out of this are 2 conclusions. 1, that men are starting to act the way women have been acting, and that 2, y'all don't like it. It's almost like no one likes being treated like ass. Having respect for yourself is not just for the girls. So if setting boundaries and not tolerating disrespect is a sassy mandemic, then mask up, bitches, because it's not going away in 2 years. POV dating during the sassy mandemic of 2023.
Why can't you start any conversation? Like, do you...
POV dating during the sassy mandemic of 2023.
Why can't you start any conversation? Like, do you even want me? Like, what do you...
Let's review the comments. Them now unfollowing.
I just sent myself a message. Blocking women is feminine, apparently.
Let's review the comments.
Oh, here's a good one.
If you have a utility meter like
Not
this
the fucking
on the side of your
commercial,
house,
Christ.
you can get paid to go solar for no money out of pocket.
Hopefully it don't
During
rain
World War
tomorrow.
II, American tank
snowing here
crews
shortly,
duked it out
just so
with
you know.
Nazi Panthers in a high
Be
explosive
colder in the
duel to the
Casper
death.
commode on the shady side of an
Crammed
iceberg.
inside 30 tons of rolling steel, the GIs went up against a better armed and more experienced enemy. All too often, the tank became a steel coffin. It was a war where survival demanded a good crew, a lot of guts, and a lot of luck. Meet the tank crews, next on Suicide Mission.
Fucking goddamn it. Christ. Oh. Oh my God, there's some girls squeaking as they were getting off the bus. Oh. I'm not a big fan of the cops here or anywhere because they're all fucking crooked. In just a minute, I'm gonna go back in and get my happy ass another banana because it's fucking cold out here. Just making sure I waste some gas to make sure that I got my phone recording and all that. Don't want it dying on me. Oh. Praise the Lord, almondy cheese and rice and all that jazz. My phone will probably die at some point. Or turn itself off, one or the other. I'll probably watch some more of this tank bullshit as I go through the store. Mostly though, I'm trying to make sure I'm recording at all points in time. You know, you never know when somebody's gonna come start shit. Yes, sir. Thank you, Andy, for almost running me over. That was sweet. Oh. Cheese and flipping rice. Oh my God. Oh, boy. Oh. 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 Oh my God. Oh my god, 2 of them. Jesus. Ooh. Oh god. Almost 8 o'clock. I said it's almost 8 o'clock.
Right, that's correct.
In here, and like only half the time does it ever work in here. Oh my god, look at all those yellow lids. Alright, so the lids here, the plastic ones, this is high density polyethylene. It's the second most recyclable plastic. The most recyclable is the one the plastic bottles are made out of. This right here. This is actually number one, and this is number two. So the number one is the polyethylene terephthalate. Number two is the high density polyethylene. And then you start getting into a lot of the lower grade plastics. Some of them, you actually have to tear them down chemically. Yep. But the great thing about number one and number two plastics is if you have something, you can take whatever that something is, put it in some slightly wet sand or into some clay of some sort, let it dry out just a little bit, and then you can make like hundreds of whatever it is that you just met, whatever it is that you had.
Oh, you make, yeah, so you can make like a mold out of it?
Yep. And then you can make hundreds of things out of plastic. Now it's not all that heat resistant, like number one plastic, because the bottles that are see-through, those are liquid resistant, heat resistant, and gas resistant.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, you can use them for air tanks. Alright, I grabbed all the yellow ones because I might possibly stick them in a mold I already have built and bring something back that's really cool.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, if I ever make it up the mountain. Alright, I'm done pretending like I'm doing something useful here. You say, Mr. Paul. I'm gonna go make fun of some people that ain't me. Oh, nice. Just making sure it's not dookie in that one. I saw a YouTube channel where a guy made mortar shells out of the NOS containers, and I went, man, that is probably among the world's most stupid ideas. Yeah. It works, but here's the thing, like out of the 6 to be fired, 2 of them blow up in the tube, and I'm like, nobody has industrial strength tubing like that, man.
Yeah.
I'll be safe. Yes, sir. I found 2 halves of tobacco. So, like, I'm living high on a hog.
Well, if I see any new couple I do, I can pick this up.
Yes, sir. Oh. Oh, fucking A. That is a lot of legs. So, there's a whole shit ton of fucking youngins in there goddamn squealing. Holy hell. On the bright side, all I had to do was go talk to one of the employees for a few minutes and pretend all the fucking squealing doesn't exist, and it helped to reduce the stressful environment. Not sure if you knew this, but that fucking sound, that shrill fucking sound, drive a person to fucking drinking. How many times can you fucking jolt yourself into consciousness because you heard something fucking scream? What's so scary about teenage girls? Oh, well, just about everything. Just about everything. Especially if she thinks she woke. You can't fart her direction, you can't look her direction, you can't breathe in her general vicinity, and you always have to be afraid of it. Oh my God, he's ugly, he's creepy. Like, fucking A. I'm gonna go hide by somebody's grandparents. Go fucking creep on them for a bit or something. I don't know. On the bright side, not all teenage girls are like that. And thank goodness, nobody is capable of being like that all the time without getting locked the fuck up. All right. I don't think I've blamed every single group yet. For what? Who cares as long as we're blaming everybody? As long as we take the time to break down in specific what we like and dislike. Isn't that what we're doing here instead of working together? I hate a broken story. You don't really know what the fuck is going on in it because you're missing pieces. Not sure if y'all noticed, but I'm a pretty big douchebag. I'm not a big fan of people. I'm even less of a fan of bullies. I don't like people who touch little kids. And I don't like people who take advantage of at-risk adults. You want to consider yourself an at-risk adult because you're a woman? Well, here's the thing. If you want to irk your way out of military service by making the claim that many women are claiming right now, which is that all women are mentally ill, so they're automatically ineligible. Well, you know, we've had quite a few women serving in the military for quite a few years. Are you saying that we should drop women from military service? Not allow them into military service? Because it seems to me there are quite a few women who are eligible for military service. Women in Russia, Ukraine, Germany. All throughout human history. Fucking blanket is soaked. God damn it. Alright. On the bright side, it's so soaked that I soaked it through my pair of pants. As soon as I set it on me. Boy, oh boy, do I feel smart. Let's get back to the tank museum, or whatever it is I was playing before this. Oh, dangerous missions, tank crews.
Power on, please. Connected.
The tank that put the teeth into an American armored division in World War II was known officially as Medium Tank M4. But to the 5 GIs that manned each of these steel monsters, it's better remembered as the General Sherman. The crews hoped that their Sherman would live up to its Civil War namesake, cut a path through hostile territory, and leave in its wake a defeated enemy.
There's one simple vision hack anyone can use to improve vision, so you can say goodbye to your optometrist for good. Did you know that vision impairments have nothing to do with your eyes? The eyes are simple.
The Sherman was conceived not too many years earlier, before America was even at war, as a weapon intended to help the infantry out of a tight spot. It was supposed to roll in and blast away at machine gun nests, enemy troops, and other soft targets. But on the battlefields of Europe, the Sherman was forced to take on a much deadlier job, shooting it out point blank with enemy tanks.
Everybody was frightened, everybody was scared, but it got built into you. You know, this is what you were going to do. You were going to see it through, one way or another.
What are you going to do? You're going to repel and try and just refuse to get back in? You just didn't do it.
Every day you would just say, man, if I can just make it through today, I got it made. But that came up every day.
Every time we got into a tank, it was suicide in the sense that we could have been killed at any time and we knew it. But at the same time, I think we all felt that we were still somewhat invincible.
Dummies.
During the war, the American Army fielded 16 different armored divisions. They were outfitted with a mix of 2 types of tanks. A small tank named the General Stewart, and the heavier Sherman tank. Only 2 of those 16 divisions, the 2nd and the 3rd, were designated as heavy armored divisions, meaning that their regiments were equipped primarily with Shermans. A heavy armored division was made up of 3 regiments, 2 armored regiments, and a regiment of mechanized infantry, plus field artillery, medical staff, supply people, signals people, reconnaissance units, combat engineers, and a maintenance battalion. Altogether nearly 14,000 men. Placed bumper to bumper, their vehicles would stretch for almost 10 miles. But a heavy armored division's combat power, its reason for being, was its 232 Sherman tanks. 3rd Armored Division had been formed back in the spring of 1941. In camps across the United States, the men spent almost 2 years learning the technology and the tactics of armored warfare and how to work together as a team. Once in England, they trained for 10 more months and prepared themselves for the invasion of Europe. They came ashore at Omaha Beach in Normandy, France in late June 1944, 3 weeks after D-Day. And on the morning of June 29th, the men of the 3rd Armored Division got their baptism of fire. They attacked the Germans dug in around Villiers-Foussard, a small village in the French hedgerow country. In the dense tangle of trees and narrow roads, the American tankers came face to face with the big German tanks with guns described by one GI, the size of telephone poles. The German Mark IV and the 53-ton Mark V Panther tanks, with their high-velocity 75mm guns, made mincemeat of the Shermans. The German armor-piercing shells punched through one side of the Sherman and straight out the other. In the maelstrom of close combat, tanks were quickly knocked out, blown to pieces, or set ablaze, incinerating the trapped men. An intense artillery barrage forced the German defenders into retreat, and the Americans won the battle. But the tankers had suffered a terrific beating. Belton Cooper was a 25-year-old ordnance officer in the 3rd Armored Division, tasked with recovering and replacing the battle-damaged tanks.
All morning long, they start bringing these tanks with these broken and twisted bodies inside, and I was absolutely devastated. I thought, Cooper, how in the hell are we going to win this war? The Germans are shooting the hell out of these tanks. I mean, that's the first time I seriously doubt if we could win this war. The Germans were just devastating us. They would just slaughter us right and left.
At the end of its first day of the war, the 3rd Armored Division had lost 351 men and 31 tanks.
Halloween is right around the corner, and I can tell you right now, this is going to upset a ton of people because we're giving away these amazing...
The relentless power of the German tanks had caught the American crews off guard. They were clearly outgunned by the panzers of Hitler's Third Reich.
I was frightened. I was terrified. Sometimes I cried. Sometimes I prayed. It really got to me. I was mad too. I could see how in the world the American army could put our soldiers on the field of battle with a gross infantry tank. And I just didn't know how we were going to get through the war.
I was angry at people that I didn't know who they were, but it was people who I had expected would, with the ability of the American resources, build the best tank in the world.
The American tankers had learned an unexpected lesson. Their Sherman was not the best tank, as they had been led to believe. The first confrontation with Nazi tanks in Normandy, France in June 1944 proved to the tankers of the American Armored Force that their M4 Sherman was no match for the enemy tanks. Too many Shermans and too many trained crewmen had been lost in the fight.
It was really a policy that was adopted at the beginning of the war that caused the loss of these soldiers. It was a matter of the American government chose production over research and development and made production paramount.
Research and development of new tanks became
right,
a
it was a
priority
shit
for
tank.
the U.S. Army at the end of World War I.
We still won the war because we had a ton of them.
In 1920, Congress passed the National Defense Act, which reorganized the post-war army and abolished the fledgling tank corps. innovation virtually came to a standstill. The only new ideas came from an eccentric inventor named Walter Christie.
That's right, the Christie suspension
In this
system.
1931 film, a radical Christie design is put through its paces for the Army brass.
That's funny, it knocked out several of the
Christie's
dudes
secret
in it.
was a unique suspension that transformed the tank into something like a sports car with a cannon. But the Army's response was less than enthusiastic.
The Army had a lot of problem dealing with him because he was eccentric and insisted on everything being his way, and the Army couldn't modify or change it. And
Meanwhile, if the Brits had had about 1,000 Christies, it might have been able to do with 500 Christies. They were more than a match for the Mark II and Mark III tanks. Alright, they might not have done much against the Mark III tanks, but considering the tactics of the Sherman, yeah, they were... But the gun's gonna go all the way through 6 inches of armor. And you're only gonna make stuff 4 inches thick. Or it's something that can go through 20 inches of armor. And you're only gonna make it 4 inches thick. You might as well go, you know what? The thickness doesn't matter in this fucking case. We need guns on the field. Against the Mark III tanks at the very beginning of the war, the Christie would have fucked them up. Alright, let's continue with this history bullshit.
eventually they just gave up dealing with him.
Frustrated by the Army's indifference, Christie took his ideas to Europe. Ironically,
Russia and Germany.
many of the German tanks that the U.S. Army would come up against in World War II sported a Christie-style suspension. Left without a tank corps to supervise the development of armored fighting vehicles, the infantry and the cavalry branches designed their own tanks. The infantry looked at tanks as weapons that should support riflemen on the assault. They needed to be maneuverable and pack a lot of firepower. In 1939, the infantry settled on a tank called the M2 Medium. It had a crew of 6, no less than 8 30 caliber machine guns, and a short-barreled 37mm cannon in a top turret. The cavalry, on the other hand, had considered its traditional roles in scouting and pursuit, and put its money in lighter, faster tanks. They were armed with either machine guns, or in later models, a 37mm cannon. The light tanks required just 4 crewmen. Harley Swinson drove a light tank.
At the time, we had just shoe signals on our shoulders and stuff, you know. You didn't have a radio contact. It was mostly manual contacts for driving and backing up, right or left. And when they wanted you to stop, they'd give you one good rap, you know. You know you were supposed to stop.
I've dealt with a hanging belly, love handles, or flabby arms, and now I'm going crazy about this odd exotic rice hack. I'm losing weight so quick.
On September 1st, 1939, the Germans surprised the world with the power of their blitzkrieg attack on Poland. Compared to the German panzers sweeping across Europe, the American tanks back home look like toys.
It's not going to get any nicer tonight.
On July 10th, 1940, the Army created the Armored Force and immediately began to play catch-up. Army planners needed a new tank, and fast. Tank builders at Chrysler wanted to replace the small 37mm of the M2 Medium with a larger 75mm cannon already in the inventory. But they hadn't yet figured out how to mount that big gun in a rotating turret. So they kept the 37mm gun in the top turret and mounted the larger 75 in a sponson on the side of the tank. Called the M3 Medium, the new tank made its spectacular public debut in April 1941 at Chrysler's giant Detroit tank arsenal. The M3 went to war with the British and U.S. armies fighting the Germans in North Africa. They found that since the 75mm gun had a very limited traverse, it was difficult to aim. The whole vehicle had to be moved to align the gun on a target, and that cost precious time in the heat of battle. But the M3 was only a stopgap. Before it was even in combat, the Army Ordnance Department was working on a new tank with a 75mm gun in a top turret. A turret that could traverse 360 degrees. In October 1941, this design was standardized as medium tank M4 and would become known as the Sherman. The first Sherman rolled off the assembly line in February 1942.
The second Sherman to roll off the assembly line.
Soon, tanks would be coming off the line at a rate of 2,000 a month. Chrysler's Detroit tank arsenal was the major builder of the tank.
The very
but other
second
manufacturers
prototype
like the American
was called
Locomotive
Michael.
Company, Ford,
And
and
it's
the
from Great
Pullman Car
Britain.
Company also built Shermans. The Sherman had a 5-man crew. The driver and an assistant driver worked in the hull. The loader, the gunner, and the commander worked in the turret. For them, the tank's real beauty was its simplicity.
The Sherman tank was manned by farm boys that had been used to working with tractors and that sort of thing. When they sat down in the seat where we are right now, they weren't at a loss because mechanics had been a major part of their life. The problem in a tank is this: there's so much equipment jammed inside of this hull that what you find in it is a super tight, confined quarters that get very hot and very dirty very fast. And at full power, particularly if this tank was buttoned up, that is, the hatches down, the noise would be so much that you could barely hear yourself scream.
The first Shermans out of the factory were shipped overseas to outfit British armored units fighting the Germans in North Africa. In their first combat in September 1942, the British knocked out some enemy tanks and lost a couple of Shermans. The fight ended more or less in a draw. The first Shermans in U.S. hands met the enemy in Tunisia on December 6, 1942. A company of 5 tanks from the 2nd Armored Division attacked German tanks and anti-tank gun positions. All 5 Shermans were destroyed. By the time the U.S. Army was fighting the Germans in Sicily and Italy, it was clear the M4 Sherman was outclassed. Its 75mm cannon had a low muzzle velocity. The speed at which the shell left the barrel was too slow to punch a hole in the thick German armor. The men shared stories of watching their shells harmlessly bounce off Nazi tanks. The German guns, however, with their higher muzzle velocity, easily riddled the Shermans. With a weak gun and thin armor, the Sherman was a death trap. The unavoidable compromise that builders of the U.S. M4 Sherman had to make between firepower, protection, and mobility became even more obvious as the Allied forces came ashore in Normandy, France. During the summer of 1944, the Sherman crews would suffer considerably. The French farm just inland from the D-Day invasion beaches, was a patchwork of small fields bordered by dense mounds of dirt, roots, and trees. These so-called hedgerows made perfect hiding places for the German defenders. Their weapon of choice was the Panzer Faust. This German invention fired a warhead called a shaped charge. When it hit, the energy of the explosion would focus to a point, and the hot jet would melt through the armor in a split second. In this German training film, the weapon penetrates nearly 5 inches of steel, twice the thickness of the Sherman's frontal armor.
If you have a utility meter like this on the side of your house, you could get paid to go solar for no money out of pocket. It costs nothing to install the panels, and you can immediately get a credit on your bill when your meter runs backwards, and then you get paid for the excess power you produce from your solar. There are federal and state subsidies.
You wouldn't think with a little hole as small as that to where it went through that it could do all the damage it did inside of the tank. But when it blew out inside it just tore up everything.
Panzer Faust.
The Panzer Faust was similar,
Scary
but far
as fuck.
superior to the American bazooka. It didn't have the range of the bazooka, but that didn't matter in the hedgerow country. But the most lethal anti-tank weapons in Normandy were the German Panther tanks with their high-velocity 75mm guns and the bigger Tiger tanks with the 88s.
The Germans with their 88s could pierce the front armor here if it hit at the right angle, travel through the compartment and right out the back.
Yep.
July 11th, 1944 was one of the most critical days in the Battle of Normandy. The Germans launched a massive counterattack near the town of St. Lo. Sherman tanks from the 3rd Armored Division moved forward to repel the onslaught. The American tankers soon found themselves overwhelmed. Walter Stitt was 20 years old and a gunner.
The lieutenant came over, ordered the tank commander to get out of the tank, said he was going to take over. And found out later the lieutenant had already lost 2 tanks that day, and this was his 3rd tank. And so he got in, and we were sitting still, and all of a sudden the platoon sergeant started yelling over the phone, said, "Lieutenant, they're shooting at you, back up, back up." Then the sergeant got on him again, said, "Lieutenant, back up, back up." And I looked, and he just was paralyzed. And he reached over and he grabbed his mic button and pushed the button and said, "Driver, back up." Bang, just like that was hit. And the shell hit right in front of the gunner and killed the gunner and the tank commander both. Of course, then survival gets in. You said, "I got to get out of here and get out of here fast, because if they hit me once, they'll get me again."
Chuck Miller was also 20 and a loader. This, too, was his first experience in combat. His commander and gunner were killed by a direct hit almost immediately.
You shouldn't, but you just lose it all there for a minute there. You just don't know what's going on, and all you can think about is getting out of the tank.
By July 16th, reinforcements had helped repel the German offensive at St. Lo. By then, the division had lost 87 tanks. Bert Close was 19. His tank company lost 12 of its 16 tanks.
The strategy of sending tanks up roads, one behind the other, where there was no maneuverability, was terrible. One way or the other, they were just sitting ducks.
23-year-old Clement Elizondo was a gunner.
There were several bad mistakes made. One, we went in with no infantry. We had plenty of infantry units around, so I don't know what happened, but it was a pretty bad mistake.
I was totally disgusted both with the Sherman tank and with the people who were making the decisions on how to use it. I thought, what kind of fools do they take us for?
The Army had never before experienced this kind of warfare in this kind of terrain. Every day in the hedgerows, the armored warriors learned a costly lesson. If they could break out of Normandy in the tangle of hedgerows, they would hit flat, open country. Better country for maneuvering tanks. They tried by fitting a handful of Shermans with bulldozer blades.
If you're texting a girl you really like, but she's leaving you on red, waiting hours to reply, or ghosting you whenever you ask her out, then listen.
The tank dozer would knock down the hedgerow, and other tanks would rush into the breach. But this had a serious drawback. The Germans soon learned that wherever the tank dozer was, that was where the breakthrough was going to happen. The Germans then concentrated their fire at those points with murderous effect. A sergeant named Curtis Cullen of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron came up with a remarkable solution. He took scrap iron girders and welded them to the front of a tank's hull. On July 22nd, a tank commanded by 31-year-old Albert Genest was fitted with Cullen's iron tusks for a secret demonstration for the Army brass.
I was set up there with my crew, and we got in position and we got the order to hit it. And we hit it, and we went through, and we were back to the bivouac. How long it lasted.
Cullen's device, called the hedge chopper, or the Rhino, became an instant hit. The 3rd Armored Division commander wanted 57 of his tanks fitted with the hedge choppers by the next morning. The task of mass producing the device fell to the division maintenance crews.
Well, they had to make a different hedge chopper for each tank because the parts were all different. We just cut up parts and tried to put them together the way we could. So the individual men had to improvise and design their own hedge chopper. We'd have one guy cutting up the steel, one crew was fitting the steel together, another crew would come and weld it out.
Maintenance men worked around the clock, cutting and fitting the hedge choppers. They were racing to rig as many tanks as possible in time for Operation Cobra, the upcoming Allied attempt to break through the German lines. The big attack was scheduled to begin the next morning.
We found out it took 40 man-hours of labor to weld up a hedge chopper. And we only had 40 men, we only had 7 hours to go. So we worked all night long, worked our butts off, but instead of 57 hedge choppers, we had 7 the next morning. That's all we had. But fortunately, the good Lord looked after us, and the storms and the rain and the weather was so bad that the Air Force had delayed the attack for 3 days. Well, in 3 days, we got about half of them on there ready to go. We never had the 57, but we got about half of them, about 25 or so. And that was the thing that really saved the day.
After the weather cleared on July 25th, a combination of air power, artillery, infantry, and armor broke the German lines. Enemy containment collapsed, and the Allied armies hurtled into the heart of France. The 3rd Armored Division moved 17 miles in 2 days and lost only 2 tanks.
It was the best single innovation that I know of that improved the capability of the Sherman tank. And in fact, I think without the hedge shot, I don't think we'd have gotten out of Normandy. I think we'd have been bogged down there. I don't think we could have really broken out.
For his invention of the hedge chopper, Sergeant Cullen received the Legion of Merit. And the Sherman crews got a new lease on life. It was during the pitched battles to break free of the French hedgerows that the crews of the American M4 Sherman discovered its greatest deficiencies. The 75mm gun was too weak, and at just 2.5 inches, the armor was too thin. The Sherman's hull was penetrated so easily that both the enemy and the crews themselves took to calling the tank a Ronson, an allusion to the American cigarette lighter that was advertised as always lighting the first time.
Oh, yeah.
The tankers often added their own armor. Steel plates, called applique armor, were welded over vulnerable spots. Spare steel tracks, sandbags, and even logs were slung on the tank in an attempt to break up the searing blast of the Panzerfaust. By the summer of 1944, improved Shermans had begun to arrive in quantity. Upgraded Shermans like the M4A3E8 or EZ8, with its thicker armor, better suspension, and a safer way to store ammunition, was a welcomed addition. But the most appreciated improvement was the new 76mm gun. Although the shell was just a scant millimeter wider than the 75, the propellant capacity of the casing was about 50% greater. That gave the shell a much higher muzzle velocity and a better chance of penetrating German armor. But the armored warriors had improved their chances of survival not by just improving the tank. They had also improved the way they used the tank. Tankers learned to attack with the support of not just infantry, but with artillery and air power. This new way of fighting as a team came to be called combined arms warfare. Oftentimes, aviators from the Army Air Corps traveled with the tanks to help coordinate the attack.
We had a liaison assigned to each company from the Air Corps, and they had a special radio where they could talk to their pilots. And he rode right along with us and communicated with the airplanes when we were getting their support. And it was really good when you'd see one of those P-47s dive right ahead of you, and you'd hear a big bomb boom, and you knew, rest assured, when you got up there was going to be a tank laying on its side there.
The Allied armies, with the 3rd Armored Division often in the van, used combined arms to great advantage as they swept across northern France. They had become a veteran fighting team, well versed in the art of armored warfare.
The hardest thing I had to do was to shoot somebody. You know, that's just entirely foreign to the way you've been raised, is to shoot and kill somebody. And so the first few times that you step on that trigger, knowing that you're really trying to kill somebody, was really difficult. But after you've been in combat for a while, you see other men killed. You begin to get the feeling it's going to be me or them, and if it's got to be that way, it's going to be them and not me.
For all its problems, the Sherman had one beloved asset: reliability. The men who fought the tank appreciated its simple, dependable, rugged design. And so did the men who fixed them. A well-trained mechanic was worth his weight in gold to a mechanized army on the move. Repairs were made as close to the front as possible to help maintain the momentum of the offensive.
The ordnance units in Europe were pushed farther forward than anyone thought was possible. And these units were pushed right up behind the front lines. And sometimes with shifting front lines, they were the front lines.
Tanks knocked out in combat were picked up by giant recovery trucks and brought back to a secure rear area called a Vehicle Collection Point, or VCP. The first step in repairing a tank often proved to be the most difficult: removing the mangled bodies of the dead crewmen.
These tanks were coming to that VCP, they were just shot all to hell. I mean, you couldn't believe it, and the bodies are still in there, and we had to get the bodies out. If a guy gets hit in the head just explodes, the brains and everything just go over the tank. It's horrible. The brains get all down the turret race and then the electrical wire and the harness, and you just have to rip all that stuff out and clean it out thoroughly. Then after to do that, to replace the harness and to paint the tank all over inside. And even after you paint it, there's still faint stench of death that comes through that paint. You're not sure, but it's always there.
Shot up tanks could be fixed, but experienced crewmen were lost for good. Once in combat, it became virtually impossible to get trained replacement crews. New crewmen were trained in a matter of days, sometimes not at all.
I remember once getting a replacement. I asked the guy his name and got that, and I said, what kind of training did you get? He says, infantry. I said, did you go to Fort Knox? No. I says, have you been in a tank before? And he said, no. I says, oh my God. I said, what are you doing here? Well, we were lining up to move out. And so I put the kid in the assistant driver's seat. The next thing you know, a few shells came in. This kid gets hit, but not bad. In fact, I don't even know how bad it was. And he took off on me because we hadn't gone far. Took off running. I still, to this day, don't know his name. I never saw him again. And I never found out what happened. But that was war.
Now, later on, we began to lose so many men that we had to operate with a three-man crew. We had a driver and a tank commander and a gunner. So then they sent down 2 truckloads of raw recruit infantrymen. They brought them down, we lined them all up. Said, how many of you guys have ever operated a tank? I mean, none of them have been in a tank. Some of them have never seen a tank before, not close up. So we got them out there, so we took them and divided them into crews. And so we took a tank driver and 2 men, put them in a tank. We let each man fire 3 rounds apiece. That's the only training they had on that gun. That's all they had first time. And about 5 o'clock that night, we released them. And going out about 8 o'clock that night, 3 hours later, out of that 17 tanks, 15 were knocked out alongside the road. And I don't know whether any of those young guys survived or not. They had no idea what they were getting into. And I thought, how in the hell can you send these kids? But there was nobody else to send. That was it.
By the end of August, the 3rd Armored Division had moved out of northern France and through the cities of Mons and Liège, Belgium, on their way to Germany. Major General Maurice Rose, 3rd Armored Commander, had pushed his division farther and faster than anyone thought possible. The autumn rains had turned the European countryside into a quagmire. The tracks had to be fitted with special extended end connectors called duck bills to help the tanks move through the mud. On September 12th, a reconnaissance platoon of the 3rd Armored had crossed from Belgium into Germany and occupied a small border town. For the first time since the Napoleonic Wars, a German town had fallen to an invading army. The soldiers of the 3rd Armored, the 2nd Armored, the 4th Infantry, and a host of other divisions wasted no time in assaulting the Siegfried Line, the complex network of German bunkers and defensive fortifications. From now on, Hitler's soldiers would be defending their home turf, and for them, no sacrifice would be too great to blunt the spearhead of the armored warriors. The American Armored and Infantry Divisions cleared a path through the vaunted Siegfried Line by the fall of 1944. Even though German resistance was stiff, it looked like the Allies could end the war by Christmas. But on December 16th, the German army launched a massive counterattack and drove a deep wedge between the Allied forces. They hit with everything they had. The American Air Force couldn't fly in the lousy weather, and the tankers found themselves fighting for their lives.
You know, you keep wondering how much longer it can go on, or am I going to get it tomorrow, or, you know, what's going to happen?
You get to where it's a survival of the fittest, and if you're lucky, you make it.
I think there was a time when I felt that I could have died, and that would have been all right. I wrote to my folks once when I thought maybe that time was coming, but I did tell them that they should know that if I am killed, that I got more Germans or more Jerrys than would ever even up by getting me.
The Ardennes Offensive, the so-called Battle of the Bulge, was without a doubt the armored warrior's most desperate and miserable fight.
He would lose a tank and see his crew shot all to hell, and then get back in the tank and still fight it, lose that one and lose another, and he kept going. We've had some that lost 3 and 4 and 5 tanks and still kept fighting. Those men were courageous. The bravest men I ever saw.
They were determined to hold their ground, and with the return of clear skies, they once again enjoyed the full support of American air power. The Allies attacked, and by February 1945, the 3rd Armored Division had finally reoccupied the area around the German towns of Aachen, Stolberg, and Mausbach, the region it held before the Bulge. In mid-February, the division tankers received an answer to their prayers. The Army's first heavy tank. Called the M26 Pershing, it was a radical new design, conceived from the very start as a tank killer. Built by the Detroit and Grand Blanc tank arsenals, it was armed with an incredibly powerful 90mm gun. It had a very low silhouette, with armor up to 4.5 inches thick, and a torsion bar suspension system reminiscent of what Walter Christie had tried to get the Army to adopt more than a decade earlier. The M26 more than made up for the deficiencies of the Sherman. By the end of February, 200 Pershings had been issued to the various armored units. The 3rd Armored Division got 10 and wasted no time in putting them to use. Within a week, the new heavy tanks were leading the division to its next objective in Germany, the once grand city of Cologne. Clarence Smoyer was a gunner leading the way in one of the new Pershings.
We finally moved ahead more, and I remember one of the lieutenants got on the phone and he said, "Gentlemen, I give you Cologne. Let's knock the hell out of it."
A Signal Corps photographer, Tech Sergeant Jim Bates, tagged along with the division as it rolled into Cologne. His film footage captured the extremes of the armored war, the vulnerability of the Sherman, and the power of the new Pershing. His images are some of the most dramatic and gut-wrenching of the entire war. In this shot, the Sherman has just been hit. A crewman, his foot severed in the attack, falls and bleeds to death. The Pershing crew spots the enemy tank, a Mark V Panther, moving behind a building. The cameraman moves ahead and continues filming as the M26 stalks its prey.
So we started to fire into that building, which he was inside of. I thought maybe if we'd fire armor-piercing shells, they would go through the building and maybe still get it. But evidently he just kept on backing up and went all the way down to the cathedral.
The German tank moves into the plaza of the Grand Cathedral. The Pershing pursues. Smoyer spots his target and opens fire.
I fired first shell on the run, hit him, and then we stopped and fired another one.
The German driver is killed. The commander and the gunner bail out. Smoyer fires a third time. The concussion from his gun rots the camera. Ammunition set off by the shell turns the Panther into a funeral pyre. It sat and burned for 3 days.
I didn't go back and look in that afterward because I knew some of them died in there, and I spent a lot of time wondering if any of them survived. You know, it still hurts, even though they were the enemy. They're still humans.
In 2 months, Germany would surrender and the war in Europe would be over. Because of its zeal to lead the way, the 3rd Armored Division was officially dubbed the Spearhead Division. But being the vanguard came with a price. The 3rd Armored lost 648 of its tanks in combat, and another 700 were damaged in action. It also suffered more battle casualties than any other armored division. 10,371 men killed, wounded, or missing, including its commander, Major General Maurice Rose. He was killed in action near Paderborn, Germany, just weeks after the assault on Cologne. During the war, Harley Swinson escaped from 3 tanks, and so did Walter Stitt. Bert Close bailed out of 4. And Clement Alessandro had survived the loss of 5 Shermans. And thanks to his job of having to account for all the battle-damaged tanks, Belton Cooper holds the distinction of seeing more destroyed Shermans than any man alive.
I said, what a terrible thing war does to a young man. It takes him in the prime of his life. It demeans him. It humiliates him. It destroys the last vestige of human dignity. You have no dignity in the army or the war at all. And I said sometimes it kills him, a harm remains him. And those of us that survive are never quite the same.
I guess one more banana. Fucking freezing. I know y'all ain't entertained right now, but that's a good thing. On the bright side, there ain't no dead bodies in this. No. Oh. 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 Somebody broke the hand warmer. Somebody broke the hand warmer. Oh, it's friggin' cold out there. That's all right, as long as I keep on coming in and buying bananas one at a time.
Anything got warm place around here?
For $400 a month, and if you're an addict.
I used to have that shelter, man.
Do what?
Yeah, I used to have that shelter.
They don't have an actual shelter here. They have a place called Helping Hands.
Yeah, I said there's about 3 months on this right here.
You gotta pay $400 a month, a whole bunch of friggin' classes, and you also have to apparently get permission to care, which is a giant pain in the butt.
No, it's not. It's not hard. You got a dog or anything?
I don't.
It's fucking easy, dude. You just call care and first time they get it open, probably the next day. Probably better do it when it's cold.
I've been in there since I got here. They've been trying to convince me to go elsewhere, and then as staff changes their issues, it's been just a big giant pain in the butt.
Alright. Free, I gotta do vacuum over there.
I haven't even been able to get out there. Like, I keep having to go to care, and care just makes it a pain in the butt. The thing is, while I'm taking this abuse out here, I didn't want to move here, all right? I could have been fine in my car, but I had to take abuse as soon as I got here. And I just kept up. I've been to lots of churches. I have recordings of being assaulted at almost every church, and the church staff doing nothing. The issue is, when I first got here, and was taking assaults when I first got here, the cops didn't do squat. They wanted to send me in a magic circle of a whole bunch of mental health places. They wanted to send me to a bunch of friggin' different magic carpet rides to all these other different places where I've already been. I've been literally given the runaround. It's just me. They talk over me, and then like people just keep on harming me. I keep on recording people assaulting me and threatening me. And
I thought it was a cool place. They get you a place to live too.
that's the thing. They've literally never helped me in any way, shape, or form with any of that. And I'm sorry, my voice is not working right. I was coughing earlier.
I know ladies work out there, most places out there, and it's free.
There's a couple of ladies out there, I guess. Here's the thing, is that I'm abused no matter what. The thing is, I'm abused no matter what. I'm abused by a lot of people here in this town. A lot of people stay out there. And that's one of the things about being here for 11 months, taking abuse from a bunch of drug addicts out on the streets. Many of them end up going to that place. It's been a giant pain in the butt. I should let you work.
It's a quarter on the floor.
There is not. He's full of it.
Well, that's sad. I would have picked it up. I keep coming in and getting bananas so I can warm up.
Honey, you're more than welcome in here.
Yes, ma'am. I just want to make sure I don't like overwarm my welcome or push the boundaries.
Nope, you stay warm. You're more than welcome. We all like ya.
They turned off the hand warmer over there by the deli, though. I guess it's like a meat warmer or something, but still, same thing for me.
Welcome. If you have your club card, key in item code, then
4011.
Weigh your bananas. Please touch accept weight to continue. Move your bananas to the bag. 20 cents. If you have your club card, please scan it now.
Can you open up your packet? We open up the trash.
How many store-provided bags did you? Your total is 20 cents. Please insert coins, then insert bill. Please wait. System processing. Please remember to take your receipt and all of your change. Thank you. Welcome. If you have your club card, please scan it now. Scan items one at a time, placing them in the bagging area after each scan. For items without barcodes, touch the quick pickup button. If you have your club card, please scan it
All right, I know there's a warm spot over here somewhere.
No. Yeah, then kind of there. Must be a map or something.
Might be the machine.
Maybe that's what it is. You need plastic underneath your blanket to try to keep warm in this weather.
Yes, ma'am. Thank goodness I had a trash bag for the window.
Every day talking about it. Yeah. They have someone to come to us. But then there's a vision possibility. And they're different sales than, well, some things you get both ways, but sometimes it's, oh, you get, okay. Oh, yeah, they are. Have a partner or a friend or relative are kind of like they just digital coupons and use the same number.
Power on. Pairing. Connected.
Lame.
That's a lot of eggs.
Yeah, I like my eggs, you know?
Are you flipping them too on Instagram?
Flipping them?
You know, it's
No.
a joke. Everybody on Instagram is flipping eggs because they're so expensive.
Yeah, no, they're very expensive, but I can afford them. It's no big deal.
I wonder what job you can afford. You can afford 20 cases of eggs. I can barely afford one. You're taking all the eggs from this lady. She's looking at you like, what eggs is she going to be able to get after you?
Maybe I could buy you like one carton of eggs, and maybe I could buy her another carton of eggs. Would that be cool? Just not right now because I'm busy, but like maybe later.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, that's very sweet, actually. It looks like you're going to have like an egg party or something.
I'm having an egg party, yeah. Literally an omelet party.
Here. Put your number in right here because any guy that can come and get 20.
Just so you know, that was a video on how to pick up chicks at Target. Oh.
Russia continues to lose numerous vehicles in the war in Ukraine. And while Ukraine is also losing many, they are being heavily supplied with more from many European countries, the US, and others. So Ukraine's number of armored fighting vehicles remaining before they run out is more based on how much these countries are willing to give them. Russia, on the other hand, only has whatever they can produce, which is way lower than the rate that they're losing them, and what they have laying around in storage. Once they run out, they're in real trouble. Armored fighting vehicles include everything from tanks, IFVs and APCs, self-propelled artillery, and more. And they are all extremely important on the modern battlefield. I've already made videos counting the number of Russian tanks and artillery, which is what most people focus on. So now time for another type of vehicle that is equally, and in some ways even more important, IFVs, or infantry fighting vehicles. In a sense, these fill a role in the middle between the big, heavily armored and gunned, but less maneuverable tanks, and the more flexible and troop-carrying capacity, but less armored and lightly armed armored cars and trucks. An IFV can carry infantry into the battle like armored cars, but is also gunned and armored enough to stay in the fight like a tank. So, again, they are a very important and valuable type of vehicle. That being said, just how many does Russia have before they run out? But first, real quick, our sponsor, NordVPN. Now I've partnered with them for a long time, and they give a special discount for my viewers over at nordvpn.com/covert. But if countries will enable you to access websites, play games, and even find discounts on games that might not be available in your own country. And that's just a few information on IFVs and how they're used and how they're performing in the war. But again, they're able to bring troops to the front lines as well as stay and fight themselves. Now, some terms like armored fighting vehicle, armored personnel carriers, and infantry fighting vehicles are used slightly differently by different people. But in general, Russia's main IFV is a BMP, which actually in Russian stands for Infantry Fighting Vehicle. But some organizations include BTRs as well, such as the military balance here. So, to keep things a little clearer, we've counted and we're going to list both the number of BMPs at each base as well as the total number of all armored fighting vehicles, which includes BMPs with BTRs, MTLBs, BRDMs, and others. But that will not include tanks, self-propelled artillery, cargo and utility trucks, etc. Also, another factor not considered is the condition of these vehicles. Unless they're visibly and obviously beyond repair, these vehicles in storage do not get as much attention and maintenance as active vehicles. And that's true in Russia as well as the US and everywhere else. So they'd all need some level of refurbishing and repairs before being active again. Some might just be minor work, others might be well past the point of saving and possibly only good for spare parts. And real quick, a Twitter account named HIMARS helped out in identifying and counting these armored vehicles. They really deserve a lot of credit for a lot of the work done in this video, but we've identified 31 different bases storing armored fighting vehicles. So without further ado, let's start. To start, the 1295th with 170 BMPs and a total of 183 AFVs. The 3018th, a big base with 521 BMPs and 651 total AFVs. The 94th, another big one with a lot of artillery, 252 BMPs and 752 AFVs in total. The 22nd, 254 and 702 BMPs and AFVs total, respectively. The 111th had the most BMPs, 778, and a total of 800 AFVs. The 216th had 0 BMPs, but a total of 326 AFVs. The 243rd also had no BMPs, but 120 AFVs. The 372nd, again, no BMPs, but 114 AFVs. The 120th, just 7 BMPs, but a total of 154 AFVs. The 7020th also had 0 BMPs, but 655 AFVs total. A base about 45 kilometers southwest of Cheetah also had no BMPs, but 158 AFVs in all. The 103rd had 480 AFVs in total, 304 of which are BMPs. The 349th, I couldn't get very high resolution satellite imagery of, so it's harder to count, but 305 BMPs and a total of 791 AFVs. The 769th, another big base, with 632 AFVs, of which 587 are BMPs. The 2544th is the biggest, with 916 AFVs, 496 being BMPs. And then the remaining bases we checked had no BMPs, but a base in Furlow had 170 AFVs. One near Bransk had 124. Another east of Ulan Ude had 199. The 163rd, 108. The 560th had 248 AFVs total, and the 61st with 104. Then, finally, there were 10 other bases that we didn't bother to purchase imagery of. But in Google Maps imagery, there were only 3 BMPs total between all these bases, and 530 total armored fighting vehicles. So, that all gives us a grand total of 3,677 BMPs in storage, and 8,917 total armored fighting vehicles. Again, including those BMPs. Also, again, that's not counting tanks, or self-propelled artillery, or trucks, etc. And for note here, the green just means the imagery we used is from 2023, yellow 2022, and red 2021. The oldest imagery, though, are all from bases with very few vehicles, so that's why we decided it wasn't worth the expensive cost of purchasing new satellite imagery. And then also, after we're done counting, we like to check and compare with other sources to make sure we're not way off, which might possibly suggest we missed something. But the Military Balance 2023 states they have 4,000 BMPs in storage, and 11,000 AFEs as we define them. The BMP number is almost right on, and the little over 300 less that we had could easily be explained by additional vehicles that Russia has lost since the Military Balance was published in February, and also the fact that their counting would have been done at some point earlier. However, our AFE numbers vary a lot more. We had about 2,000 less. Now, a few things could help explain the differences. Most notably, their numbers of 4,000 BTRs, 2,000 MTLBs, and 1,000 BRDMs are exactly the same that they stated back in 2019, which obviously isn't the case. So they haven't updated those numbers at all in at least 4 years. And I think it's also worth noting some of our potential errors, such as the possibility we misidentified some vehicles, such as command and engineering vehicles, which look real similar, or missed a few other small storage sites. But if I had to guess, I bet our margin of error is plus or minus 10% to be conservative. Now, Oryx has listed 2,049 IFVs that Russia has lost. Now, you'll see a higher number on their site, but again, as I said, some people categorize vehicles differently, and he includes things like BTR-82s and BMD-4s. But for our total AFVs, again, not tanks or SPGs, Oryx has 4,257 lost. So, just some simple math. If they continue to lose these vehicles at the same rate that they have been, Russia will run out of BMPs in about 3 years, and those other AFVs in about 3.5 years. But again, it's important to note that not all these vehicles can be repaired and used. A good percentage might be beyond saving. And sure enough, we've seen some vehicles at these bases that haven't moved in 10 years. And also, Russia is building new vehicles as well. And finally, the rates of losses change. But probably in another 2 or 3 years, if they do continue losing vehicles at the current rate, they could be in a lot of trouble. And again, a big thanks to HiMars over on Twitter. He helped out not only counting these vehicles, but also finding and identifying the different bases. I was originally not going to count these other AFVs, as they're extremely difficult to distinguish from each other. But he's done an absolutely incredible job and is shown to be highly skilled at this. So again, go follow him on Twitter. They'll be posting the satellite imagery that we bought, and also giving some more detail as well. Thanks.
There's a lot of really cool pictures of tanks. It was kind of weird seeing them from a satellite image. The Cornet missile launcher. IS-2. Dangerous missions, assault on Iwo Jima. British Army declares that its new AH-64E helicopter is combat ready. Huh. I wonder if they're making them or if they're retrofitting or... Oh, it's a dual rotor, kind of like that. Is that it?
Enemy positions across various locations. The AH-64E, which replaced the Apache mech. One in 2021 offers improved flight performance with a new drivetrain and rotor blades. It features improved displays and sensors, advanced communication systems, and integrated maintenance diagnostic systems to increase aircraft availability. The British Army is set to receive a fleet of 50 AH-64E Apaches by 2024. These helicopters will replace the Apache Menke, one helicopters that have been in service since 2001. Thanks for watching.
Be right there. Wait. Use the
What's up, Spare Parts Army? Welcome back to Task and Purpose. Russia claims their most advanced anti-tank missile system, the 9M133 Kornet, is capable of taking out any main battle tank with a single shot. It's a man-portable anti-tank guided missile, which was designed specifically to take out NATO's main battle tanks. And for a period of time, it made Russia the most technologically advanced anti-tank force in the entire world. They say it outmatches both the US Javelin and the British NLAW missiles. In this video, we're going to examine whether or not that's really true, or if maybe, just maybe, the Russians are lying to us. Anything that you use every single day is worth investing in. That's why this year, I upgraded to this video sponsor, the Ridge Wallet. It's light, sleek, and industrial. It doesn't fold or awkwardly budge in your back pocket. It seriously changed my whole pocket situation. It's designed to fit Shop it for 45 days. You can send it back for a full refund if you don't love it. It's the perfect gift for Father's Day. Click the link in the description and use code TASK to get 10% off your order today.
Could you finish that up and get back
In the 2014 invasion of Crimea, the Russians' Kornets destroyed hundreds of Ukrainian tanks, and that was its first widespread use against armored targets. In fact, it played a big role in providing proof that it was actually Russia who invaded Crimea, because people were digging these Kornet missiles off the ground and seeing that it had Russian writing on it. So you can understand why Russia thought they were headed in the right direction with this weapon. On paper, the Kornets looks like the weapon you would want to take into combat. But as we'll see, those numbers don't always match up with the practicalities of the realities of using it in the heat of combat. Some sources call it a second generation, while others will say that the Kornets is a third generation anti-tank system. I like to think of it more as I call it a 2.5 generation, honestly. I think the reason for this discrepancy, it's kind of like a halfway between the two, because it's not wire guided. It has a newer laser guided ability, but it still lacks an automatic lock-on homing feature. The Kornet is also known as the AT-14 Springar, according to its NATO designation. Springar is, of course, as we all know, a reference to the legendary creature from Cornish fairy lore. I assume the NATO officer who came up with that nickname wanted to show off their obscure, pretentious European fairy knowledge. Someone promote that guy. Where did the missile originally come from? Development began in 1988, where they set to work on creating a modular, laser-guided missile that could be mounted on a tripod or attached to the turret of the armored vehicles like the BMP. The laser-guided ability was a unique aspect of the Kornet, as the earlier generations of the Soviet ATGMs, like the AT-4 and AT-5, were wire guided. The use of the laser guidance meant the rounds were more accurate and less likely to malfunction after being launched. It does, however, have the downside of being vulnerable to the tank's smoke countermeasures. Every tank has a smoke canisters that can be instantly deployed, which can throw off any laser guided munition. The Kornet, however, was not designed to fully replace these older Soviet launchers, because Russia simply could not afford to fully equip their entire force with them. The AT-14 system is comprised of the 9M113 missile, a tripod launcher unit, and a long-range thermal sight. The original Kornet launcher could range out to 5,500 meters, with more modern warheads like the Kornet EM capable of launching out to 10,000 meters. But this is where the on-paper specifications versus the practical combat use starts to kind of butt heads. One of the key distinguishing features is its insanely far max range, right? The Javelin max range, for instance, is only 2,000 meters. But there's a catch. The effective ranges on the Kornets are largely limited by the operator's ability to visually acquire and identify the enemy at long ranges using the thermal sights. Russian thermal optics have never been known for being outstanding resolution. Basically, your human beings have a limit to their ability to visually see the enemy. So even if your missile can fly farther, it won't do you any good if you can't track the target. This is a huge problem, particularly in the current Ukrainian conflict, because both sides are using the same or very similar looking equipment. It's the reason why we see both sides placing brightly colored tape all over themselves to clearly mark which side they're fighting on. Using the same vehicle and equipment can potentially make it difficult to confirm your target is actually an enemy at the extreme distance of 10 kilometers. How often do you even have a distance of 10 kilometers unobstructed? There are some other pros and cons that need to be weighed with this weapon. Though the Kornet missile system was designed to be able to be carried by 2 soldiers, due to weight and size, the system can only be carried short distances. This is a potential downside of the Kornets when compared to the NATO anti-tank systems,
which are much more portable. For this reason, the Cornet usually has to be transported in support vehicles close to where they're going to be in place. Once in place, however, it takes the operator less than a minute to set up the launcher and fire a round, or 5 minutes if you're like me and you need to take a second to catch your breath after running with a 120-pound missile launcher. The whole weapon was designed to conceal the soldier while they aim. This is the reason for the tube being mounted above the fire control system. Part of the reason that it's so heavy is because the missile needs to be huge in order to defeat the heavily armored NATO tanks. Now, according to multiple open source military intelligence resources, they place the AT-4 Cornet's maximum penetration at between 1,000 and 1,300 millimeters of rolled homogeneous steel. This means the only place it wouldn't be able to defeat the Abrams main battle tank is in the frontal armor, where it has a protection rating of approximately 1,600 millimeters. Like with most things in Armored World, though, there are exceptions to the rule, and we'll see in just a minute how some of the tactics that are used with the Cornets are used to increase how destructive it is. The system is more commonly seen attached to vehicles, take on armored threats such as the BMP-3, Tiger 4x4, and Russia's newest line of armored cars and IFVs. These vehicles-based systems are more for defense against tanks rather than trying to take them head-on. Because if you don't succeed with your first shot, there's a good chance you're going to have a very angry tank pointed right at you. AT-14s mounted on BMPs are mounted similar to the way that American TOWs are on Bradleys, with 2 launchers on each side of the turret. In this configuration, however, reloading is extremely difficult and typically involves taking the whole vehicle out of the fight for an extended period while the crew reloads. This differs from American systems that can be manually reloaded by the crew without leaving the vehicle in just a couple of minutes. Auto-loading versions of the launcher are in the prototype stages, but don't expect to see any of them on the battlefield anytime soon. If the missile doesn't automatically lock onto the target, how does its tracking system work then? The Cornet uses lasers to guide itself onto the target. The operator has to constantly aim the laser and make sure they're keeping the missile on target, painting the target. If they're able to do that, then they will hit within 5 feet of where they're aiming. While 5 feet might sound like a large margin of error, when your target is literally bigger than a barn door, it makes a little more sense. The back of the Cornet missile flashes incredibly bright, which makes it easier to see at longer ranges. It might sound impossible to keep a laser dot on the target 5 kilometers away, but it's easy to see the laser dot on your thermal imaging device. The computer inside the missile locks onto that laser and flies in a conical pattern, gradually in a tighter and tighter rotation until the round hits the target. Now you might wonder why they spin around the laser and it doesn't just go in a straight line. But this is to ensure that the round does not block the physical laser guiding it, or the operator doesn't lose sight of whatever vehicle they're trying to destroy. Trust me, you don't want to be the guy who misses with a weapon system that costs more to fire than your commander makes in an entire year. These go for about $26,000. This laser-guided munition is better than wire-guided systems because they greatly extend the range and don't run into any of the issues that come with having a giant wire attached to you, like trees or other debris get snagged on wire-guided systems. But more specifically, any body of water, even a small pond or a big puddle, could be enough to short out any wire that it touches. This is why modern American tow systems have been moving away from wire-guided to laser-guided. In this regard, the Cornets is more advanced than most common American ATGMs. The missile itself is a tandem explosive that's designed to destroy any reactive armor seen on most modern main battle tanks and APCs in service today, which is those brick-looking things that you see sprinkled on top of vehicles. The Cornet's dual warhead 152mm explosive detonates the ERA with a small initial charge, then with a second charge defeats the now exposed armor by focusing all of the explosive power of the round directly into the vehicle. It's also capable of mounting explosive thermobaric rounds designed to take out bunkers or harder stationary targets other than vehicles. Because the explosion they cause uses so much oxygen, it sucks the air out of whatever building or structure that gets hit. The real question is, how have the Cornet missile systems been used in combat? The Cornet was introduced in the late 90s for Russian forces and for export to different countries. It saw its first combat use in 2003 against us Americans of all people. Not cool, man. In the first week of Iraq war, Iraqi special forces used the Cornet against Americans advancing in the country, although they were only able to disable 2 Abrams and 1 Bradley. U.S. forces were actually ordered to seize any samples of the Cornets at that time to be able to be analyzed by military intelligence. This brings us to another important aspect, which I never hear talked about with anti-tank missiles. The Cornet has a max velocity of between 250 and 300 meters per second. That is slow enough for active protection systems to shoot down with ease. The Javelin missile, on the other hand, reaches speeds of up to 2,000 meters per second, which makes it near impossible to intercept by a tank's countermeasures. To add to this, Cornet tripod launchers don't necessarily work as well in an offensive.
Yeah, well, it still has to go at least 2,800 meters per second in order to defeat the Israeli armor, which is why Hamas keeps testing different compositions and why Iran and, well, literally every nation around the world is trying to make a dual charge that can do that, so that it can defeat the the Israelis have this thing that is so fraction of a second. It can literally shoot down a missile coming at a tank up to 2,800 meters per second. So a lot of folks in a lot of places are trying to make man-portable weapons that can go 3,000 meters per second. As he was explaining there, the American Javelin missile goes, well, at least 10 times faster in some cases, and around 8 times faster for the other type. So, I mean, it's fast. There's one more type that travels like 350 meters per second. And the Javelin still goes, obviously, 2,000 meters per second is still like 4 times that, isn't it? I don't know. I'm fucking tired and my math skills fucking suck right now. I'm just guessing. I guess that'd be about 6 times faster, roundabout. Anyway, anyways, you should follow my guess, but I don't want to be unable to record.
setting as they would in a defensive setting, which Russia was planning for because due to the size and weight, they're slow to reach the battlefield. So by the time they're emplaced by dismounted soldiers, the opportunity to use them is already lost. This is where Ukraine has had more success with its own launchers, which can hide out in strategic locations until a target comes into view. This isn't to say the Cornet isn't a dangerous weapon system, but it's not seeing the defensive tank-on-tank battle that it was originally designed for. Now, compared to the Javelins being fielded by the Ukrainians, the Cornet has one major significant drawback, being that it only fires in a direct fire mode. Unlike the Javelin, which utilizes a top attack mode, striking the most vulnerable parts of the tanks, the Cornet, in 99% of cases, is firing directly at the most well-protected portion of the vehicle. You might manage to penetrate the armor in certain areas, but not in critical sections of the vehicle that would fully take it out of the fight. This means that if a target is moving, or if it shifts positions even a little bit, there's a good chance that the guy who fired the round will not be able to adjust in time. To counter this, vehicles like the BMP-3 incorporate systems that rapidly fire 2 Cornet missiles in quick succession, with the hopes that the first round will create a weakness in the armor that the second missile can exploit. Due to the relatively high cost of the Cornet in Russia's military budget, these systems are few and far between, not being able to be deployed in large, significant numbers to make any real tactical impact. Russia has recently resorted to creating technicals with Cornet systems strapped to the bed of the truck. But these technicals are completely vulnerable to any small arms fire and only capable of hit and run attacks. Russian technicals will never compare to Toyota pickup trucks with entire AA cannons in my book, though. Now, Russia has continued to modernize the Cornet launcher, creating remote firing variants and upgraded loading and targeting systems. But with the current military and economic situation, it's questionable if these upgrades will see the light of day. What do you guys think of the Cornets after seeing its performance in Ukraine? Does it live up to the hype? I'm Chris Cappy, your average infantryman, and this is Task and Purpose, signing out. Welcome back, Spare Parts Army. I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. The 9K-38 Igla family of missile systems represents the most advanced of the Soviet Union's man-portable anti-air launchers, so effective that we've seen it still in use today by both sides of the Ukraine conflict. Grab one of these instead so you can stop trying to shoot down Chinese spy balloons with a potato launcher. So how does this Cold War warrior perform on the modern battlefield in Ukraine? What does its development tell us about the strengths and weaknesses of Soviet military engineering? How can you sham your way out of being the private stuck with carrying this thing? Join us as we lock on to the Igla missile system in today's episode. But before we get into that, Japan's military is now doubling their defense budget and adding new equipment to their arsenal. Husk is one Japanese-inspired steel knife that you'll want to add to your own personal arsenal. It's made from high-quality Japanese steel and features an oak wood dark texture rustic style handle with variations. In 1960, the USSR began development of the Strela II as their first production man-portable air defense system, or MANPADS for short. Trust me, that's way better than their original abbreviation of hunky pads. But they ran into issues producing reliable seeker heads, so it wasn't formally adopted into the Red Army until January 1968. Even then, the weapon had severe limitations, with a hit probability of only 25% under test conditions. 25%, that's rookie numbers, you gotta bump that up. And the launcher could only lock on to enemy aircraft from the rear when the hot exhaust nozzles were directly visible. This meant it could only function as a kind of revenge weapon where you could target the enemy aircraft after it had already dropped its payload on you and ruined your day. Here we see a video of a Ukrainian soldier getting a lock on a Russian fighter jet after it dropped its payload. Several upgraded programs increased the reliability of the weapon, and the Soviet Union went on to produce an incredible number of the Strela family, shipping them to basically any country or rebel group in the world who said anything even remotely nice about the hammer and sickle. 2,700 old East German Strela II systems were actually donated by Germany during the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Despite the upgrades, the Strela series still had trouble engaging aircraft from anything but a rear angle, and by the early 1970s, aircraft were starting to develop effective countermeasures to heat-seeking missiles like flares and jammers. Designers started a new project, building a missile from the ground up with true all-aspect engagement and better resistance to countermeasures. Codenamed Igla, the Russian word for needle, the project hit roadblocks again, with the seeker head having to restart and reorganize the entire development team in 1974. Due to the delays, the Soviet Union decided to split development into two sections, one that would develop a simpler interim design that could be built sooner, with the other team hammering out the more ambitious design. The Igla 1 went on to become the simpler system and was adopted in 1981, while it took another 2 years for the full capability design to be finished and adopted as simply Igla in 1983. Like the Strela before it, the Igla systems would be heavily produced and exported by the Soviet Union and later Russian Federation, with over 23,000 units shipped by 2015. Produced in large numbers and heavily exported, the Igla is a lightweight system with a sophisticated infrared heat seeker that the Soviet Union built to counter NATO air superiority in case the Cold War ever heated up. Ironically, the Igla is now deployed against other Soviet equipment more so than it's used against NATO aircraft.
That's over twice as many Stinger units exported by the US in the same period. The weapon, of course, wasn't perfect, with its own fair share of reliability issues like this one. Don't worry, no one was injured there, but it goes to show the serious...
Welcome in, everybody, to Bonus Center in Portland, Oregon.
It's the Trailblazers' home opener.
Yeah, that's why I don't fuck the Rockets.
The issues like this one. Don't worry, no one was injured there, but it goes to show the serious forces that you're messing with when you launch one of these things. The Russians began development of a replacement for the Igla in the 1990s called the Verba, but as the Russian economy and defense industry floundered after the breakup of the Soviet Union, the Verba wouldn't be ready until 2014. Because of this delay, the Igla was upgraded into the capable Igla S variant, and it's still in active service alongside the Verba as production ramps up on the new system. Russia's commander-in-chief of the ground forces, Oleg Salakov, said in an interview with the official newspaper of the Russian Ministry of Defense on September 30th, 2022, that 1/3 of Ukrainian fighter jets were shot down using Igla S and Verba manpads. Oleg Salakov went on to say the greatest burden of covering his troops is with these medium and short-range air defense systems. But the real burden is clearly on me, having to pronounce anything with more than 2 syllables. So obviously we need to take all of this information with a grain of salt because of where it's coming from, but it does hint at something really important here, which is that both sides have suggested that the Igla is highly effective and necessary for covering troops' advances, because otherwise you're completely vulnerable to airstrikes. The greatest strength of the Igla is that it can even reportedly strike cruise missiles flying at close range. There's even some video proof of this occurring, because it's like you guys always say, pics or it didn't happen. So the most modern Igla S system weighs in at 19 kilograms, or about 41 pounds, including the 11 kilogram missile, and has a reported range of 6 kilometers, up to an altitude of 11,000 feet, allowing it to engage targets in a wide bubble around the shooter. Igla launchers were distributed throughout the Red Army in regimental air defense networks, and were even issued to Soviet submarines to help counter anti-submarine warfare aircraft. Like most manpad systems, the Igla is a heat-seeking missile, meaning once the shooter locks onto the target and fires the missile, it steers itself towards the hot exhaust and jet nozzle of an aircraft. The missile contains a gas generator, which drives a small gas turbine to provide electrical power. The piston moves the canards to steer the missile. The Igla stands out as the first Soviet design truly capable of all aspect engagements, meaning the shooter can lock on from the front or sides of an aircraft and not just the rear. It's a huge advantage because you want to be able to shoot down the aircraft before it shoots at you. The Igla also has a more sophisticated sensor with a wider field of view than earlier designs. It's able to detect ultraviolet light in addition to the normal IR band. By combining the IR and UV data, the onboard electronics can build a better picture of the target and ignore countermeasures like flares much more effectively. A direct test by Finland, which used both the Igla and the French Mistral AA systems, found that the Igla had a better seeker than the French design. Whether or not that test is accurate, I don't know, but it's interesting to note that some Soviet-era equipment might have been very well produced. One of the unique features on the Igla not seen in other AA systems is its use of an aerospike at the front of the missile to decrease drag during supersonic flight. Heat-seeking missiles use blunt nose cones for a better field of view to track heat signatures in front of them, but this shape creates a lot of drag when flying supersonic. The short probe on the front of the Igla, however, breaks up the standing air in front of the missile, reducing the shock wave the missile body creates as it flies up to Mach 2.3 towards the target. This doesn't interfere with the sensor behind it, as the spike is placed in the blind spot of the telescopic reflector used by the guidance section. Higher missile speeds mean less time for a pilot to react and use countermeasures or evasive maneuvers. Because man-portable systems have to stay light enough to be carried by a single soldier, they tend to have very small warheads. This isn't seen as too much of a problem though, because militaries use a principle called virtual attrition. Even if your air defense system doesn't shoot down every aircraft that it fires at, as long as it proves enough of a threat that it scares aircraft off or makes them waste munitions in an inaccurate attack, then the air defense system has done its job. This proved highly effective against the American military in Vietnam and against the Soviets in Afghanistan, where both militaries had to restrict the types of aircraft that could fly near the front, as well as the altitude tactical aircraft could strike from, because of the threat of the Strela II and Stinger missiles. Even so, the designers of the Igla system were determined to increase the lethality of their missile by using a fuel that would detonate alongside the warhead when it hit a target. This works over short engagement ranges where the rocket motor still has significant fuel in it to boost the explosive power of the missile, packing an extra punch in a small package. The latest version of the Igla also has proximity sensors that allow the missile to detonate on a near miss, spraying the target with shrapnel. After there were some bad experience with Strelo-equipped troops having terrible aircraft identification skills while in combat, the Soviets developed optional Identify Friend or Foe systems, or IFF, that could clamp onto Igla systems and warn the operator if the target they were aiming at was friendly or preventing fire altogether. Because the Igla was designed in the Cold War era when the Soviets anticipated skies full of NATO air power, these IFF systems became a problem in the post-Soviet era. According to historian and defense analyst Steven Zolga, the IFF systems had trouble during the 2008 war between Russia and Georgia because both sides used Soviet airframes. The IFF systems couldn't determine which aircraft were friendly and which were enemy. As we've seen in the Ukraine conflict, though, it's been going on since 2014. Engineers have since fixed this problem as both sides seem equally capable of shooting down the other Soviet-style aircraft. Combat history and proliferation controversy. Although the Cold War gone hot scenario the Igla was designed for thankfully never came to pass, the Igla proved itself all over the world, from how aggressively the USSR and Russia exported and offered production licenses to the system. The first documented loss of an aircraft due to an Igla was in 1991 during Operation Desert Storm, when an American F-16 was shot down over Iraq and a pilot was captured. 13 coalition aircraft were shot down by Iraqi manpads during Desert Storm from a combination of Iglas and Strela 3s. During the Sichan conflict between India and Pakistan in 1992, an Indian operation around Badur Post was counterattacked by Pakistan forces. An Indian Igla shot down the helicopter that was carrying Brigadier Mossad Navidi Anwari along with his assault troops, causing the entire attack to falter. But probably the most infamous use of the Igla during the 1990s was on April 6, 1994, when a private jet carrying the president of both Rwanda and Burundi was shot down by a pair of Igla-1 missiles, triggering the events of the Rwanda genocide and a bloody civil war. Throughout the late 1990s and 2000s, you might remember that there were fears of incidents of manpad systems like the Igla being used against civilian airliners by terrorist or criminal elements, and it became a cause for international action. The Wassenaar Arrangement was signed by 42 countries in 1996 with a subsection for missile systems export controls. The US-led program in 2003 sought to dismantle and dispose of 40,000 missiles from mostly Eastern Europe to help combat missile proliferation. While fears of terrorists shooting down jetliners from coast to coast fueled a lot of anxiety after 9/11, defense analysts debated how much danger civilian aircrafts were really in. Because the battery coolant units on manpad launchers have a shelf life of only around 10 years before the chemicals in them start to degrade and become useless. The wide Cold War exports of the Igla and Strela launchers to unstable countries aren't as much of a risk as you might think. During the 2003 Iraq War, for instance, very few operational manpad systems were found in Iraq because of the decay of these crucial components. For countries with recent supplies of battery coolant units, though, the Igla is still proving itself a dangerous missile. Ukraine has used their Igla missiles to great effect during Russia's 2022 invasion, especially during the opening phases of the war, when they still hadn't received many of the FIM-92 Stingers and other Western shipments. There are scores of videos of Ukrainian manpad teams shooting down Russian aircraft, drones, and cruise missiles. Many of these were confirmed or suspected Igla missiles. Russia's loss of attack helicopters, including their most advanced Ka-52 Alligators, have been so severe that they've had to change tactics to inaccurate pitch-up rocket attacks from afar rather than risk running the manpad's gauntlet. A textbook example of that virtual attrition principle that we mentioned earlier. While Russian forces have undoubtedly used their own Igla and Verbus systems to shoot down Ukrainian aircraft, their kill claims in the current conflict are dodgy at best, having claimed numbers so ridiculously high that they would have shot down every single Ukrainian aircraft several times by now. Conclusion and wrap up. Manpad systems in general are shorter range than other air defense systems like SAM batteries or radar-guided missiles, but their portability means they can strike from anywhere, and their passive IR sensors mean they don't give pilots any warning that they're being attacked until the missile is in the air. The Igloo family of weapons is a competent third-generation Manpad system that has been continuously upgraded since the 1980s to keep pace with Western designs and aircraft countermeasures, representing a huge leap forward from the older Strela designs that generally lagged 5 years behind NATO missiles technology. Interestingly, the Igloo forms the basis for some of NATO countries' own Manpad designs, like the Polish Grom, later renamed the Piron and exported to the Baltic states. The Igloo hit probability of 50 to 75% today is respectable, but lower than most modern versions of the FIM-92 Stinger, according to most accounts. The Stinger also uses a more advanced IFF system that should result in lower fratricide results. Even if it's not as shiny as the latest Stinger system, though, the Igloo is a dangerous opponent on the modern battlefield, and pilots underestimate it at their own peril.
Hello, and welcome to the latest video from the Military Stage channel. The first of 31 M1 Abrams tanks that the United States pledged to Ukraine 8 months ago finally have arrived. And just in time, combat losses steadily have depleted Ukraine's inventory of Western-made tanks since Ukrainian brigades launched a counteroffensive across southern and eastern Ukraine back in early June. The 68-ton, 4-person M1 A1s are preparing to reinforce our brigades, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated. Zelensky did not elaborate on how many tanks had arrived in the country, nor on how long it would take for them to be deployed to the front line. Washington had promised to provide 31 Abrams tanks to Kyiv at the start of the year, part of more than $43 billion in security assistance pledged by the United States over the past 18 months. Ukraine's M1s are ex-US Marine Corps Firepower Enhancement Package models. They got the same 120mm smoothbore main guns, composite armor, and high-end optics as other M1 models. They also have laser systems, so-called far target designators, that help them to gather data on a target from 4 miles away and relay them to nearby artillery batteries. The M1 is one of the best tanks in the world, which is not to say it's invulnerable to Russian mines, anti-tank missiles, and artillery. It's no more untouchable than is, say, a contemporaneous German-made Leopard 2A6, Swedish Sturv 122, or British Challenger 2. The U.S. Department of Defense has decided to send an older model of the M1, a one from the Army Reserves, which can be prepared for sending more quickly instead of the previously promised M1 A2s. The main difference between the basic versions of the M1 A2 and the M1 A1 is a more powerful armor protection package and modern electronics. However, the FEP, Firepower Enhancement Program, increasing all-weather, day and night target acquisition and engagement range, and AIM-SA, Abrams Integrated Management, situational awareness, versions of the M101, which are currently in service with the U.S. Army, have undergone significant modernization, which partially brought them to the M1 A2 level. The tanks received a new main gunner sight with an improved block, second-generation thermal imager, FLIR, forward-looking infrared. The fire control system has been updated to use the new M829, a 3 heavy armor piercing, and M1028, tungsten fragment anti-personnel 120mm tank rounds. The tank commander also received a new stabilized commander's weapon station. The A1 and A2 are actually different versions of the same tank that have undergone parallel modernizations. In practice, the M1 A1 SA and M1 A1 FEP versions could be compared to the M1 A2 SEP2, which was produced in the 2010s. Regular U.S. Army Abrams modifications receive the Blue Force tracking systems, providing unit commanders with current information on the location of tanks on the battlefield relative to friendly forces via data link. Most likely, it will be dismantled before being sent to Ukraine, as was the case with the digital units for the M700 and 77 howitzers. The armor containing depleted uranium will also most likely be dismantled because this type of armor is a secret which the U.S. does not disclose even to its closest allies. One of the most notable peculiarities of the Abrams is its massive multi-layer armor. The tank is protected from cumulative or subcaliber armor-piercing projectiles with combined armor. Special ceramic tiles sandwiched between two thick metal sheets. It's not known yet which version of the M1 A1 will be sent to Ukraine. The Pentagon press secretary, Brig Gen Pat Ryder, said that 31 used bodies of M1 A1s would be repaired and modernized with the support of Ukraine's Security Assistance Initiative, for which General Dynamics would be paid $400 million. This means the M1 A1s are likely to be substantially upgraded and different from the M1 A1 SAFAP versions. There might even be a separate Ukrainian version, as the US is known to often practice developing customized modifications, not just for tanks, but for other weapon systems, including fighter aircraft such as the F-16. The Ukrainians have, or had, 21 Leopard 2A6, 10 Sturv 122s, and 14 Challenger 2s. After 3 months of offensive operations, they'd lost 3 A6 and a Challenger 2. At least one Sturv 122 has been damaged, if not destroyed. The Ukrainians also have lost at least 3 of the 40 older Leopard 2A4s they so far have received. The 31 M1s, plus nearly 200 lightweight Leopard 1 A5s that also have begun arriving in Ukraine, not only will make good Kyiv's recent tank losses, they should allow the Ukrainian General Staff either to form new mechanized brigades, or to add tank battalions to brigades that don't yet have them. And there's a good chance more M1s are coming. At least one media outlet already is reporting that a second batch of 30 Abrams is likely. That makes sense. The American custom, 20 months into Russia's wider war on Ukraine, has been to pledge a small initial consignment of a particular armored vehicle type, and then to add many more copies once the type is established in service with all the requisite logistics and training infrastructure. That's how an initial 50 M2 infantry fighting vehicles became 200 a few months later, how a pledge of 90 Stryker IFVs quickly doubled, and how the handful of high-mobility artillery rocket systems swelled to nearly 40. To be sure, the Americans have ample stocks of thousands of older M1 SE. The only impediment to a much bigger transfer of the tanks to Ukraine is their armor. It's a matter of policy that the United States removes the uranium armor from its M1s and replaces it with tungsten before giving or selling the vehicles to foreign allies. The excellent mobility of the Abrams is ensured by the Honeywell AGT 1500 gas turbine engine and the Allison X1103B automatic gearbox with 4 forward and 2 reverse gears. Its power-to-mass ratio of 24.4 horsepower per ton impressively surpasses that of the T-72B3 tank, which is a mere 18 horsepower per ton. Its advertised top speeds are 72 km per hour on-road and 48 km per hour off-road.
That's insane.
The battlefield experience of the Ukrainian forces using NATO standard tanks in their counteroffensive has undeniably proven their high combat efficiency and crew safety. Ukraine has thus far lost only 5 of 71 Leopard 2 tanks it received. About 10 have been damaged and are being repaired in EU countries. These figures testify to the high reliability and repairability of Western tanks. Importantly, Leopard 2s have been used to break through Russian defenses, and such operations are known to be very challenging to any armored vehicles, with heavily mined fields and roads within Russian artillery's range hampering and often completely obstructing the movement of Western tanks. Now, 31 Abrams tanks will likely give the Ukrainian forces some advantage in chosen sectors of the offensive. The United States has also announced supplies of shells with depleted uranium to Ukraine.
Damn.
So far, Ukraine has received shells of this type from the UK. Depleted uranium is purified to contain only the U-238 isotope. Half-life 4.5 billion years, removing the more radioactive U-235 used in nuclear weapons. Half-life 700 million years. Uranium has the highest atomic weight of the primordially occurring elements, with a density about 70% higher than that of lead and slightly lower than tungsten. Thanks to extreme density of depleted uranium, such shells have a much higher armor-piercing capacity, enabling them to destroy any armored vehicles. The Abrams M1 A1 and the German Leopard 2 A4 had the same 120 mm guns, and subsequently nearly the same firepower. The Abrams fires M829, a 3 armor-piercing rounds with a depleted uranium core, which can pierce 700 mm thick armor at ranges up to 2,000 meters. Such impressive characteristics threaten even Russia's most advanced tanks, such as T-72B3, protected by Contact 5 and relict dynamic armor. Besides the main gun, the Abrams is armed with 3 machine guns, 2 of which are mounted on the turret, a 12.7 mm machine gun by the commander's hatch, and a 7.62 mm machine gun by the gunners. The third machine gun, called coaxial, is synchronized with the main gun. At short ranges, the trajectory of its rounds is almost identical to that of the projectile fired from the main gun, which makes it a perfect instrument for quick and accurate aiming. With all the M1 Abrams combat equipment it has obtained from the U.S., the armed forces of Ukraine are looking forward to using Abrams tanks in offensive operations against Russia's T-90Ms and T-72B3s, relying on their strong armor and high firepower. And that's our video in this episode. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. Stay connected with us for more interesting and latest videos.
I am so fucking tired.
At Area, we know our made tough work pants will treat you well, because we treat them terrible. We drag them.
The enduring images of the panzer formations of World War II are the famous battle tanks, The legendary panthers and tigers, which have become synonymous with the Wehrmacht. While they are undoubtedly the best known, they were by no means the most numerous fighting vehicles in the Panzer divisions. Every bit as important as these true tanks were their less celebrated cousins of the assault gun and tank destroyer formations. In many respects, they were similar machines to true tanks, and frequently did the same job. But they sacrificed the benefits of the turret for the ability to mount a bigger gun, which was carried on a fixed mounting, pointing straight ahead at the enemy. In 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the Allies captured this powerful monster, the Sturm Tiger. The troops who knocked out this giant adversary must have breathed a huge sigh of relief, because this devastating machine was so powerfully armed. It had outgrown mere artillery power and was equipped with a rocket launcher of ferocious attacking force. It was designed to attack even the strongest fortification. Due to the range limitations of its rocket launcher, the Sturm Tiger had to get very close to its target to fire its payload. But it was so heavily armored that it was nearly impervious to any anti-tank gun on the battlefield. The Sturm Tiger's role was to rumble right up to infantry bunkers or strongpoints and fire the rocket at almost point-blank range. Obviously, the chances of survival for its target were slim indeed. The enormous rockets it carried were so heavy, the vehicle needed its own crane to be able to load the shells. Once loaded, the inside of the tank was so cramped, it carried enough rounds for only 13 shots. But when it did fire, the results were devastating. The Sturm Tiger was the last in a line of turretless tanks, which the German army had produced in increasing quantities since the outbreak of World War II. But this highly specialized vehicle was produced so late in the war that only 19 were manufactured before Germany finally surrendered.
The idea was to fire an enormous shell with a sort of plunging round that would come whistling down out of heaven and whop whatever was underneath it good and hard. But really, a thing like that is a very specialist weapon and was probably, again, like many of the German developments of this time, more trouble than it was actually worth.
The number of Sturm Tigers may have been very limited, but other turretless tanks were used in huge numbers by the Germans. Like all successful inventions, they had been adapted and improved over the 9 years since their introduction. In that time, their numbers had grown, so that by 1945, they were among the most numerous fighting vehicles in the German army, and with good reason.
Many German crews didn't like some of their own vehicles, which were too heavy, too slow, difficult to handle, had bad accommodation problems, had too low ammunition storages. You can have lists and lists of this kind of thing. It's almost a Darwinian process. You know, the survival of the fittest, as it were. The survival of the most suitable for the battlefield. The survival of that equipment which is workable and handleable and can be profitably
Unfortunately, the first attempts to produce a specialist tank hunter favored the simple expedient of mounting a 4.7 centimeter anti-tank gun on the chassis of the tiny Panzer I. It was a failure. Although the 4.7 was more effective than the puny 3.7, which originally equipped the Panzer III, it was still feeble compared to the 75mm gun of the Russian T-34. In addition, the open fighting compartment gave only limited protection. Another problem was the instability of the top-heavy assembly.
10:34.
Frequently, these tank hunters simply toppled over.
History Hit is a streaming platform that is just for history fans, with fantastic documentaries covering fascinating figures and moments in history from all over the world, from the Battle of Trafalgar and the Revolutionary era, right through to the Second World War. If you are looking for your next military history fix, then this is the service for you. We're committed to bringing history fans award-winning documentaries and podcasts that you cannot find anywhere else. Sign up now for a free trial, and War Stories fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code WARSTORIES at checkout.
Leonardo da Vinci seems to have encrypted the Great Pyramid of Giza into the Vitruvian Man, along with an exact
their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code WARSTORIES at checkout.
During 1942, frustrating attempts were made to improve upon the Panzer I in the form of the Marder II and III tank destroyers. These strange hybrids used the Panzer II chassis, the Czech 38T chassis, and sometimes even mounted a captured Russian 76mm anti-tank gun. They proved to be little more than an improvised stopgap in a steadily worsening situation east of the front. But they did go some way towards holding the advancing tide of Russian army. But really
They discovered very early in 1941 that they didn't have so what they did, they improvised. They took us to the Czech 38T attack to Czech from Rashkoda and stuck captured Russian anti-tank guns on top of it. That became, the Marder III. The first Marder was actually an anti-tank gun stuck on a French Lorraine chassis. Well, that wasn't much good. But you really had to do something very quick. And the strange thing is that whole series of German vehicles produced on the chassis of the Czech 38T and 38D became really very successful. Partly because the chassis and the suspension was very good, and partly because it put the right guns on it. And so when you've got machines like that, which in fact perform very well, whatever their hybrid origin, if they work in the field, that's fine. But that's an extraordinary story, I think, of the marriage between Czech tank design, Russian anti-tank guns, if I may put it this way, German adaptive engineering, and you get virtually a different weapon system, and a very successful one, and which in fact even outlasted the end of the Second World War.
The first two specialized tank hunting machines proved to be almost as disappointing as the Marders. The massive Elephant looked good on paper. It was based on the 80 Porsche chassis, which had been built for a proposed rival to the Tiger. This gave the five-man crew the same all-round protection as the Sturmgeschütz. In addition, the Elephant was massively armored and sported the deadly 88mm gun. It made a much heralded debut at the Battle of Kursk. Despite all the foresight, the Elephant proved to be an unmitigated disaster.
They needed vehicles to get out to the eastern front. And so what the German Army did was they welded on the back end of this big chassis a Citadel, armored it, and put a big 88mm gun. What they failed to do, however, was put a machine gun. So you had Russian infantry climbing aboard for crews.
The Soviet tank hunting teams had a field day. The hapless crews inside the Elephant had no means of effective resistance against infantry, and 40 of the 80 Elephants deployed at Kursk were destroyed in the first 2 days of fighting.
Wasn't everybody's favorite. It was very difficult to handle. It was a huge target itself. Who wanted to be burned alive or blown to pieces in one of these things?
So very rapidly, the German Ordnance Corps develops a machine gun that all you had to do was pop the hatch, stick this thing out, and it had a curved barrel. And you could hose the vehicle off with this curved barrel weapon. So a very innovative way to do that.
The remaining machines were ignominiously withdrawn to be refitted with machine guns before being sent to Italy, where the survivors were destroyed in the battles following the Anzio landings. More effective in battle than the Elephant was the Nashorn, or rhinoceros. It also featured the fearsome 88mm gun, but inexplicably left the crew unprotected in an open fighting compartment. The high silhouette of the Nashorn made it an easy target. But nonetheless, nearly 500 were issued between 1943 and 1944.
The Nashorn was the chassis of the Panzer IV that they took the turret off of and put not so well armored, but a citadel on the back of that. And they also put an 88 millimeter gun on that. And the idea was, of course, to pick off the Russian tanks at long ranges so that they couldn't close down on your position.
The Nashorn was phased out with the introduction of the first really successful purpose-designed German tank hunter, the Jagdpanzer IV. Manufactured by Vomag, this sleek machine boasted low silhouette, a machine gun for close defense, and gave its crew the all-round protection of thick, well-sloped armor. The first really effective purpose-designed tank killer had arrived. But in 1944, it had arrived too late.
The first few hours of the morning set the entire tone for the day. Drinking a warm cup of coffee and doing all of my objective planning really gets me excited to explore this place.
It's the Jagdpanzer IV Long. Carries the L70 gun, the same as the Panther 75mm. This is a early 44 model. It's abandoned late 44, captured by the Allies, brought back to this country for test and evaluation. Stayed here ever since. It's had a 5-man crew, very cramped, very noisy, very dirty.
The Allied bombing campaigns, now paralyzing Germany's industry, limited the numbers produced to just under 1,800. By this stage of the war, there was never going to be enough to stem the tide of armor flooding in against Germany from every side. To complement the Panzerjäger IV in these last-ditch battles, the Czech manufacturers, Praga, finally managed to produce a first-class tank destroyer. This was smaller than the Panzerjäger IV, it nonetheless packed a highly effective 76mm gun. Coupled with very good sloping armor, excellent mobility, and a very low silhouette, this small vehicle, which resembled a miniature Panzerjäger, was deceptively powerful and was much loved by its crews. Fortunately for the hard-pressed Germans, the Czech tank works were reasonably efficient manufacturers, and some 2,500 machines reached the hard-pressed front lines.
This is the Herzer, and one of the things about it is it's a marked improvement over some of the earlier German anti-tank guns. A lot of the earlier German anti-tank guns were open, and as you can see, this vehicle is completely enclosed. It has a very high-velocity 75mm gun, made in Czechoslovakia, very good suspension system, a very good engine, and the crews like it very, very, very much.
And it's very tough to get a grenade into. Very tough.
These knocked-out Hetzers from the archives of the Tank Museum at Bovington show just how common they were in the Normandy battles. Supplied in even more limited numbers was the next machine to emerge from the German armament industry, the Jagdpanther. Based on the successful chassis tank design for the Panther tank, by following the principle of dispensing with the turret, the Jagdpanther could carry a high-velocity 88mm gun, as opposed to the 76mm gun of the ordinary Panther. Its superb sloped armor gave the Jagdpanther enormous defensive advantages, a relatively low silhouette, and a fearsome attacking power. However, production difficulties meant only 350 of this, the best tank destroyer of the war, ever reached the front. This rare footage shows a transporter train moving these precious machines to the hard-pressed Russian front.
Use the Sherman as a light tank, a medium tank, a heavy tank,
The Jagdpanther,
and his Hetzer.
called the best tank destroyer of World War II. And that's probably the case. It has a very, very good gun. It's an 88 millimeter gun. The Panther itself had a 75 millimeter gun. But by doing away with the turret, you can lower the profile of the vehicle. You can armor up the front of this very, very well. And it became a very, very effective anti-tank weapon. The crews liked it, but it does have some deficiencies, not the least of which is the running gear. Now, if you notice, the running gear here is shaped very oddly. You have a single wheel here, two road wheels here, a single here, two here, so on and so forth. Well,
Interleague
one of the
wheels
things that
take forever
happens
to
with this
take
vehicle
off.
is mud gets up in here and it would freeze. So you get up the next morning and you have a pillbox. That's one problem. The other problem, though, is notice that if this road wheel back in here, the one back in here, fails, and you need to replace it, you need to take off 5 road wheels. This one, that one, this one, this one, and this one to get to it. So there's a lot of maintenance involved in this vehicle. And two, back up here on the back deck, if you have to work on this thing, if it broke down, there are a lot of places where you have to work upside down and blind on it. And if you drop your tools, they're gone.
In even shorter supply than the Jagd Panther was the cumbersome Jagd Tiger, a veritable fortress on tracks. In keeping with the German practice of mounting larger guns into turretless tanks, the Jagd Tiger mounted a massive high-velocity 128mm gun, which was so powerful it could destroy any Allied tank on the battlefield at almost any range. Fortunately for the Allies, only 48 were produced, and these so late in the war that even their massive firepower could not hope to thwart the inevitable tide of defeat. Most were destroyed by their own crews when they ran out of fuel, broke down, or had fired the last of their ammunition.
This is the Jagd Tiger, and this is a really bad idea. It's the chassis of the Tiger II tank. It has a 128mm gun in it. It's the largest anti-tank gun mounted on a chassis in World War II. But the vehicle is just huge. Combat loaded weight of about 85 tons. So no bridge could support it in Europe. There's a major river, every 50 miles in Europe, so no bridge could take it. You had to raft it across rivers. And two, it gets about 8 gallons to the mile. When the German army had very little fuel, when you fill this thing up with fuel browser, you're looking around for another one right away. These are the field tracks. And when this thing moved by railroad track, you had to put on smaller tracks so that 2 trains could pass each other on parallel tracks. So the crews did not like this vehicle. It was sort of meat on the table for rocket-firing Typhoon and B-51 aircraft.
The stalemate of the trenches during the Great War had a lasting effect on all the participants in that appalling conflict. Germany had suffered more than any other nation from the grim years of the Great War, but it was the British who had found the potential means to unlock the stalemate. The introduction of the tank in 1916 could well have revolutionized the course of the Great War and broken the deadlock. But the potential of this new innovation was stifled by a lack of strategic vision in the British High Command, and the possibility of an early return to open warfare was thrown away by poor British tactics. By 1917, the first British tanks had fallen into German hands, and these captured British machines were soon copied and adapted to produce the first German machines. This is an A7V Sturmpanzerwagen, the first German tank to go into
Mephisto.
battle. It was knocked out by the British in 1918. These early tanks were
It's in a
produced too
museum
late to
now.
make an impact in the First World War, but the lessons were not forgotten by the German military men. In 1939, the scars which came from long years of attritional warfare during the Great War were still fresh for the defeated Wehrmacht. In consequence, Germany's new breed of commanders were determined not to repeat the mistakes of 1918. They saw the tank as a key element in that vision, and they embraced the new tactical doctrine of blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Blitzkrieg tactics relied upon the possibility of fast, mobile operations, spearheaded by large concentrations of fast, well-armored battle tanks. Under blitzkrieg tactics, all of the tanks of the army were concentrated into the fast-moving panzer divisions, which would thrust deep into the rear positions of an enemy force, spreading panic and confusion as they advanced from the narrow point of penetration. The shock of the advance required a high level of artillery support at the point of attack, and also harnessed the extra power of air interdiction. But in the 1930s, the bulk of Germany's heavy artillery forces was still horse-drawn. What this meant was that the advancing tanks and motorized infantry would rapidly outstrip the artillery support. Even mechanized prime movers like these half-tracks had their disadvantages. Time taken to move into position and deploy the guns for action under battlefield conditions meant vital time was lost. In battle, split seconds literally meant the difference between life and death.
The blitzkrieg depended on several elements working in conjunction with each other.
89%
One
battery.
was air support
That should last me
by the Luftwaffe in the form of things like dive bombers,
at least for my video on the first thing in the morning.
But one of the things about
I
artillery
record at night, but then
during
I
the blitzkrieg era was that was
sleeping.
mainly direct fire
I don't
artillery.
like getting stuck.
They were going after point targets because the Air Force was taking out also point targets. So they
This is not where I want to fucking sleep. People keep trying to shove me in places that I've been around in circles for. They don't stop to understand the help I need. They're too busy suggesting I go to places that I know about my first week here. And then they want to keep on talking about it like they're going to be able to sell me into going out to a place that I can't go back to. Or like they're going to sell me into going to a place that I've already jumped through numerous hoops for. Or like they're going to send me to a place that has been fucking impossible to get into. Meanwhile, the need that I have is for help showing the abuse that I have fucking had to endure, including at the hands of these places. And people want to keep on sending me back to them. If I tell you I've been abused somewhere and I got video of it, please take that seriously. Because if you don't, you are seriously gonna look like a dumbass when I post it on the internet. And that sucks. There's a lot of people decided they were done pretending to be friends with me because they realized I was telling the truth about a situation that they just wanted to ignore. When you ignore your friend who's being abused because you're a goddamn junkie, that makes you a fucked up person. The whole world did not need to know about your drug addictions, those of you who told me shit like that. And I'm going to tell you something. You're right. When you use your drug addictions repeatedly as an excuse not to do the right thing. That's fucked. That's extremely fucked. I need people to stop trying to give me instructions like I'm a retarded child. I'm an overwhelmed adult. I am for assisted termination of life. You're just gonna abuse us and treat us like we're retarded? And then you don't like that word back? Well, holy shit, that's just fucked. A lot of people were under the impression that if they abused me enough, I'd just disappear. Oh, hell no, I came back with a vengeance, didn't I? You want to know what evil looks like? Maddie Boa is evil. Alicia Bollinger is evil. Good people don't do what she did. This whole country is fucking disgusting. Adios. Let's hope I don't get fucked with. I'm used to being fucked with. I just think it's fucking bullshit.